Hello, this is Dr. Paul Cottrell, and I'm going to be doing the replay of the Tucker Putin interview. I watched it last night. I thought it was a good interview. Unfortunately, I think it was too short, even though it was 2 hours long. I think that this could have gone 4 hours easily, and they should have had a break, in between, and then restarted. But that's the only complaint that I have of the interview. I wish it went longer. What is interesting is that Tucker allowed Putin to speak. Unfortunately, we have a lot of journalists that are interviewing people that are important in current affairs, where the journalist is talking over the guest. It's almost as if journalists want to show how smart they are or how powerful they are with their news network or whatever it is. But they have a tendency to interrupt the guest. I think this was kind of almost the style that I do in an interview. I let the person speak more than I'm speaking. If I know the person, well, or if they've been a guest on my show for many, many times, then I'll be more fluid with the conversation. But a journalist should ask a question and let the guest speak. And that's exactly what Tucker did. Now, I haven't done the meta analysis of the other news networks and their impression of Tucker. I will do that in another show. But what I want to do with this simulcast with Spaces and with my channels, so the ones that are listening on Spaces, thank you. For the ones that are watching through my other channels, thank you again. This video, I want to play the interview with my commentary. All right, it's my $2 of cents because of inflation. It's no longer 2 cents, it's $2. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna play the interview. I'm playing this whole 2-hour episode, but I will stop and then I will comment. I have seen the video last night. All right, I have not listened to the commentary of the other news networks of this interview. I will after this video. So let's begin. It's going to be fun. And maybe the Russian will come out.
The following is an interview with the president of Vladimir Putin, February 6, 2024, at about 7 p.m. in the building behind us, which is, of course, the Kremlin. The interview, as you will see if you watch it, is primarily about the war in progress, the war in Ukraine, how it started, what's happening, and most pressingly, how it might end. One note before you watch. At the beginning of the interview, we asked the most obvious question, which is, why did you do this? Did you feel a threat, an imminent physical threat? And that's your justification. And the answer we got shocked us. Putin went on for a very long time, probably half an hour, about the history of Russia going back to the 8th century. And honestly, we thought this was a filibustering technique and found it annoying, interrupted him several times. And he responded he was annoyed by the interruption. But we concluded in the end, for what it's worth, that it was not a filibustering technique. There was no time limit on the interview. We ended it after more than 2 hours. Instead, what you're about to see seemed to us sincere, whether you agree with it or not. Vladimir Putin believes that Russia has a historic claim to parts of Western Ukraine. So our opinion would be to view it in that light as a sincere expression of what he thinks. And with that, here it is.
Okay, before we play it,
thank you.
Before we play it, it's about almost 45 minutes of history. It's fascinating history that most Americans would not know. I didn't know many parts of the older history of Russia. I knew about the more contemporary parts of history. So pay attention, listen, just have an open mind, and let the first 45 minutes soak in of the history. Okay, it's really important because it gives you a context. And then as you go into the second half of the interview, you start to understand the nefarious activities that the CIA has been doing. And again, I think hats off to Tucker for allowing Putin to speak instead of, overpowering the guests with just a bunch of questions.
On February 22nd, 2022, you addressed your country in a nationwide address when the conflict in Ukraine started. And you said that you were acting because you had come to the conclusion that the United States, through NATO, might initiate a, quote, surprise attack on our country. And to American ears, that sounds paranoid. Tell us why you believe the United States might strike Russia out of the blue. How did you conclude that?
It's not that America, the United States, was going to launch a surprise strike on Russia. I didn't say that. Are we having a talk show or a serious conversation?
Here's the quote. Thank you. It's a formidable series.
Because your basic education is in history, as far as I understand.
Yes.
So if you don't mind, I will take only 30 seconds or 1 minute to give you a short reference to history for giving you a little historical background.
Please.
Let's look where our relationship with Ukraine started from. Where did Ukraine come from? The Russian state started gathering itself as a centralized statehood, and it is considered to be the year of the establishment of the Russian state in 862. When the townspeople of Novgorod invited a Varangian prince, Rurik, from Scandinavia to reign. In 1862, Russia celebrated the 1000th anniversary of its statehood. And in Novgorod, there is a memorial dedicated to the 1000th anniversary of the country. In 882, Rurik's successor, Prince Oleg, who was actually playing the role of regent at Rurik's young son, because Rurik had died by that time, came to Kiev. He ousted two brothers who apparently had once been members of Rurik's squad. So Russia began to develop with two centers of power, Kiev and Novgorod. The next very significant date in the history of Russia was 988. This was the baptism of Russia, when Prince Vladimir, the great-grandson of Rurik, baptized Russia and adopted Orthodoxy, or Eastern Christianity. From this time, the centralized Russian state began to strengthen. Why? Because of the single territory, integrated economic ties, one and the same language, and, after the baptism of Russia, the same faith and rule of the prince. The centralized Russian state began to take shape. Back in the Middle Ages, Prince Yaroslav the Wise introduced the order of succession to a throne. But after he passed away, it became complicated for various reasons. The throne was passed not directly from father to eldest son, but from the prince who had passed away to his brother, then to his sons in different lines. All this led to the fragmentation and the end of Rus as a single state. There was nothing special about it. The same was happening then in Europe. But the fragmented Russian state became an easy prey to the empire created earlier by Genghis Khan. His successors, namely Batu Khan, came to Rus, plundered and ruined nearly all the cities.
Now I'm going to interrupt, all right? It's important. He's setting the groundwork about fragmentation of the country, and it becomes weak. This guy, Putin, has a very strong sense of history. And that's his guiding force.
The southern part, including Kiev, by the way, and some other cities simply lost independence, while northern cities preserved some of their sovereignty. They had to pay tribute to the horde, but they managed to preserve some part of their sovereignty. And then a unified Russian state began to take shape with its center in Moscow. The southern part of Russian lands, including Kiev, began to gradually gravitate towards another magnet, the center that was emerging in Europe. This was the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. It was even called the Lithuanian Russian Duchy, because Russians were a significant part of this population. They spoke the old Russian language and were Orthodox. But then there was a unification, the union of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and the Kingdom of Poland. A few years later, another union was signed, but this time already in the religious sphere. Some of the Orthodox priests became subordinate to the Pope. Thus, these lands became part of the Polish-Lithuanian state. During decades, the Poles were engaged in Polonization of this part of the population. They introduced their language there, tried to entrench the idea that this population was not exactly Russians, that because they lived on the fringe, they were Ukrainians. Originally, the word Ukrainian meant that the person was living on the outskirts of the state, along the fringes, or was engaged in a border patrol service. It didn't mean any particular ethnic group. So the Poles were trying to, in every possible way, to colonize this part of the Russian lands, and actually treated it rather harshly, not to say cruelly. All that led to the fact that this part of the Russian lands began to struggle for their rights. They wrote letters to Warsaw demanding that their rights be observed and people be commissioned here, including to Kiev.
I beg your pardon, can you tell us what period, I'm losing track of where in history we are? The Polish oppression of Ukraine.
It was in the 13th century. Now I will tell you what happened later and give the dates so that there is no confusion. And in 1654, even a bit earlier, the people who were in control of the authority over that part of the Russian lands addressed Warsaw, I repeat, demanding that they send them to rulers of Russian origin and Orthodox faith. When Warsaw did not answer them, and in fact rejected their demands, they turned to Moscow, so that Moscow took them away. So that you don't think that I'm inventing things, I'll give you these documents.
Well, it doesn't sound like you're inventing it. I'm not sure why it's relevant to what happened 2 years ago.
But still, these are documents from the archives, copies. Here are the letters from Bogdan Khmelnytsky, the man who then controlled the power in this part of the Russian lands that is now called Ukraine. He wrote to Warsaw demanding that their rights be upheld. And after being refused, he began to write letters to Moscow, asking to take them under the strong hand of the Moscow Tsar. There are copies of these documents. I will leave them for your good memory. There is a translation into Russian.
Now, for the people that don't know, and this is really fascinating because during the diaspora for Jews, you have these what is Sephardic and Ashkenazic. Now, I come from a Ashkenazic background, all right, which is Eastern European. Sephardic is more Western European after the diaspora from Israel. Okay. Now, on my mother's side of the family, they were, and it's interesting because even in the culture, we saw a change in who owned what lands going all the way back to like the 1500s. So my grandfather, even though he was Polish, also had strong affinity to kind of like Russian influence in culture. All right. So there was this ebb and flow going on for centuries on who owned what when. So, and there was this fracturing that was taking place over many, many years. And that also happened with Transylvania and the border between Romania and Hungary. So my grandmother was from Romania, but there were a lot of kind of cultural influences that were Hungarian. So when you're talking about a group of people like the Jews, the Ashkenazic Jews, that were in that region for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, all right, you get like a fingerprint of this ebb and flow that Putin is talking about. So the American public, our history is relatively new. The founding of the country was in the 1700s. It's, so it's less than 300 years old. Now, if you want to get, a little deeper, the 1600s, you started having the colonization. Yet 1492 was when Columbus, sailed the Atlantic Ocean. So by the time Columbus discovered, quote, the New World, you already had activity within this region that was ebbing and flowing, right? So, I have seen it, just cultural thumbprints, right? Or, cultural epigenetics, if you want to call it that, which is, I think, a word I just, a phrase that I just made up, but cultural epigenetics, all right, that it shadows exactly what Putin is saying. You can see it in the Jewish culture at different periods of time within Eastern Europe, going from 10, something like 10, maybe 1000, 1050 AD, all the way to modern time. There's this ebb and flow, and that Ukraine has always been kind of like a hodgepodge. And it's fractured and then re-amalgamated and then fractured again, and it ebbs and flows. So there are many Jews, depending on what time period, were they Polish or were they officially Russian? Or were they Polish or were they, quote, Ukrainian? Or were they Romanian or were they Hungarian? And I saw it in my own family. So
you can translate it into English later. Russia would not agree to admit them straight away, assuming that the war with Poland would start. Nevertheless, in 1654, the pan-Russian assembly of top clergy and landowners, headed by the Tsar, which was the representative body of the power of the old Russian state, decided to include a part of the old Russian lands into Moscow Kingdom. As expected, the war with Poland began. It lasted 13 years, and then in 1654, a truce was concluded. And 32 years later, I think, a peace treaty with Poland, which they called Eternal Peace, was signed. And these lands, the whole left bank of Dnieper, including Kiev, went to Russia. And the whole right bank of Dnieper remained in Poland. Under the rule of Catherine the Great, Russia reclaimed all of its historical lands, including in the south and west. This all lasted until the revolution. Before World War I, Austrian General Staff relied on the ideas of Ukrainianization and started actively promoting the ideas of Ukraine and the Ukrainianization.
В преддверии мировой войны, конечно, было стремление ослабить потенциал.
Their motive was obvious. Just before World War I, they wanted to weaken the potential enemy and secure themselves favorable conditions in the border area. So the idea which had emerged in Poland that people residing in that territory were allegedly not really Russians, but rather belonged to a special ethnic group, Ukrainians, started being propagated by the Austrian General Staff. As far back as the 19th century, theorists calling for Ukrainian independence appeared. All those, however, claimed that Ukraine should have a very good relationship with Russia. They insisted on that. After the 1917 revolution, the Bolsheviks sought to restore the statehood and the civil war began, including the hostilities with Poland. In 1921, peace with Poland was proclaimed, and under that treaty, the right bank of Dnieper River once again was given back to Poland. In 1939, after Poland cooperated with Hitler, it did collaborate with Hitler, you know. Hitler offered Poland peace and a treaty of friendship. An alliance demanding in return that Poland give back to Germany the so-called Danzig corridor, which connected the bulk of Germany with East Prussia and Königsberg. After World War I, this territory was transferred to Poland, and instead of Danzig, a city of Dansk emerged. Hitler asked them to give it amicably, but they refused.
Of course.
Still, they collaborated with Hitler and engaged together in the partitioning of Czechoslovakia.
But may I ask you, you're making the case that Ukraine, certainly parts of Ukraine, Eastern Ukraine, is in effect Russia has been for hundreds of years. Why wouldn't you just take it when you became president 24 years ago? You have nuclear weapons, they don't. If it's actually your land, why did you wait so long?
Sure.
I'll tell you. I'm coming to that. This briefing is coming to an end.
Yeah. So what's interesting with Putin is he wants to cut the history really thick, so you get a strong sense of the history between Russia in that region, the ebb and flow of the borders over hundreds of years, and the encroachment of the military-industrial complex from the United States, especially after the fall of the Berlin Wall. All right. See, the thing is that Russia is concerned about a unified Europe being at their back door. It's that simple. And the United States has played right into poking the bear.
It might be boring, but it
It's not
explains
boring.
many things.
You just don't know how it's relevant.
Good. Good. I'm so gratified that you appreciate that. Thank you. So, before World War II, Poland collaborated with Hitler, and although it did not yield to Hitler's demands, it still participated in the partitioning of Czechoslovakia together with Hitler, as the Poles had not given the Danzig corridor to Germany and went too far, pushing Hitler to start World War II by attacking them. Why was it Poland against whom the war started on 1st September 1939? Poland turned out to be uncompromising, and Hitler had nothing to do but start implementing his plans with Poland. By the way, the USSR, I have read some archive documents, behaved very honestly. It asked Poland's permission to transit its troops through the Polish territory to help Czechoslovakia. But the then Polish foreign minister said that if the Soviet planes flew over Poland, they would be down over the territory of Poland. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that the war began, and Poland fell prey to the policies it had pursued against Czechoslovakia, is under the well-known Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Part of the territory, including Western Ukraine, was to be given to Russia. Thus, Russia, which was then named as USSR, regained its historical lands. After the victory in the Great Patriotic War, as we call World War II, all those territories were ultimately enshrined as belonging to Russia, to the USSR. As for Poland, it received, apparently in compensation, the lands which had originally been German. The eastern parts of Germany, these are now western lands of Poland. Of course, Poland regained access to the Baltic Sea and Danzig, which was once again given its Polish name. So this was how this situation developed. In 1922, when the USSR was being established, the Bolsheviks started building the USSR and established the Soviet Ukraine, which had never existed before. Stalin insisted that those republics be included in the USSR as autonomous entities. For some inexplicable reason, Lenin, the founder of the Soviet state, insisted that they be entitled to withdraw from the USSR. And
now you got to remember, right after World War II, the Russians lost a lot of men, right? So it may have been Stalin must have thought that he just couldn't hold it militarily, so kind of like just put them in the orbit as a loose configuration instead of being officially, quote, Russian. Now, I would have to dive in a little bit more with the details of the history, but that's my kind of knee-jerk reaction on why maybe Stalin was thinking this way.
Reasons he transferred to that newly established Soviet Republic of Ukraine some of the lands together with people living there, even though those lands had never been called Ukraine, and yet they were made part of that Soviet Republic of Ukraine. Those lands included the Black Sea region, which was received under Catherine the Great, and which had no historical connection with Ukraine whatsoever. Even if we go as far back as 1654, when these lands returned to Russian Empire, that territory was the size of 3 to 4 regions of modern Ukraine, with no Black Sea region. That was completely out of the question.
In 1654.
Exactly.
You obviously have encyclopedic knowledge of this region, but why didn't you make this case for the first 22 years as president that Ukraine wasn't a real country?
He'll say this, but the reason is that you got to remember, when he became president, there was already the start of the encroachment from the Western powers with NATO. He was trying to play nice with Clinton and with Bush Jr., and even had meetings with Bush Sr. after Bush Sr., wasn't president any longer, probably because Bush Sr. had more power than his son, when his son was president, because of his CIA connections. I tell you, even though I like this interview a lot, I still think that Tucker is part of the CIA. But the CIA is fractured. Not all of the CIA is bad. And I wouldn't be surprised that Tucker's on the good side. Now, Anderson Cooper, on the other hand, is probably on the bad side. Probably because he went to Yale.
The Soviet Union was given a great deal of territory that had never belonged to it. including the Black Sea region.
Когда Россия получила в результате
At some point, when Russia received them as an outcome of the Russo-Turkish Wars, they were called New Russia or Novorossiya. But that does not matter. What matters is that Lenin, the founder of the Soviet state, established Ukraine that way. For decades, the Ukrainian Soviet Republic developed as part of the USSR. And for unknown reasons, again, the Bolsheviks were engaged in Ukrainianization. It was not merely because the Soviet leadership was composed to a great extent of those originating from Ukraine. Rather, it was explained by the general policy of indigenization pursued by the Soviet Union. Same things were done in other Soviet republics.
Now, let me just interject here. I apologize. Putin is extremely bright, very smart. He's just stated in a very eloquent way, in a very nuanced way, that that Ukraine is a modern construct, just like the Palestinian state is a modern construct. And you're talking about a period between World War I and World War II for both of those regions. The Israel region, with Palestine and with Ukraine. These are modern constructs. So what Putin has just stated is strengthening the case of what Israel is doing to try to expand its zone. And that's where the rub is. Are you going to maintain the Westphalian thought? Or are you going to actually look at the historical context, the deep historical context, where you're talking about either thousands of years or over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and start questioning some of the reasons for the modern construct, especially right after World War I and World War II. That's the argument that Putin is saying in a very, very nuanced way. I'll tell you, Putin is extremely bright.
This involved promoting national languages and national cultures, which is not a bad in principle. That is how the Soviet Ukraine was created. After the World War II, Ukraine received, in addition to the lands that had belonged to Poland before the war, part of the lands that had previously belonged to Hungary and Romania. So Romania and Hungary had some of their lands taken away and given to the Soviet Ukraine, and they still remain part of Ukraine. So in this sense, we have every reason to affirm that Ukraine is an artificial state that was shaped at Stalin's will.
Do you believe Hungary has a right to take its land back from Ukraine, and that other nations have a right to go back to their 1654 borders?
Я не знаю, как границы.
I'm not sure whether they should go back to the 1654 borders.
Все считают, что
But given Stalin's time, so-called Stalin's regime, which as many claim saw numerous violations of human rights and violations of the rights of other states,
в этом смысле, конечно, вполне можно, если не говорить о том, что они имеют на это право.
one may say that they could claim back those lands of theirs while having no right to do that. It is at least understandable.
Have you told Viktor Orban that he can have part of Ukraine?
Никогда не говорил.
Never. I have never told him, not a single time.
У нас с ним даже на этот счет не было разговора. Он достоверно.
We have not even had any conversation on that, but I actually know for sure that Hungarians who live there
Они, конечно, хотят вернуться на свою историю.
wanted to get back to their historical land.
Отрекусь.
Moreover, I would like to share a very interesting story with you.
Где-то в начале.
I digress. It's a personal one.
This kind of ties into what I was saying about what happened with my grandmother. She was in Transylvania, and there's this border between Hungary and around Transylvania, between Hungary and Romania. All right. Now, culturally, mostly she was out in the outskirts, and she lived on, a farm and all this with goats and stuff like that. So it was a very low populated area. All right. But what's interesting is that there were postcards that some of the relatives have seen, some of my elderly relatives have seen, that actually that were coming at that time period from her side of the family, that were written not in Romanian, but some sort of mixed Hungarian language on the postcards. All right. So I'm not an expert at language, but people can look at that. Romanian language is more from the Romance language, while Hungarian is not. And you can tell the difference based on if it was a Romance language or not. Okay. I don't know all the details of that. I don't even like foreign language in general. But the point here is that in my family, on my grandmother's side, they had still had the imprint of Hungarian culture, even though being in Romania is the point here. All right. It was kind of like this hodgepodge Hungarian language, probably a Yiddish form of Hungarian, which was not Romanian, that was written on the postcards, even though, my grandmother was from Romania. Unfortunately, she passed away. My grandmother passed away when I was 12. I never heard her speak Romanian, ever. I only remember her speaking English. So, and that wasn't uncommon for people that immigrated to the United States, during the war, or right after the war. They just wanted to shed their nationality, and they just wanted to become American as fast as possible. Unlike what's happening today in with illegal immigration. They want to turn America into Mexico.
The early 80s, I went on a road trip in a car from then Leningrad across the Soviet Union through Kiev. Made a stop in Kiev and then went to Western Ukraine. I went to the town of Beregovoye, and all the names of towns and villages, they were in Russian and in the language I did not understand, in Hungarian, in Russian and in Hungarian, not in Ukrainian, in Russian and in Hungarian. I was driving through some kind of village, and there were men sitting next to the houses, and they were wearing black three-piece suits and black cylinder hats. I asked, are they some kind of entertainers? I was told, no, they were not entertainers, they're Hungarians. I said, what are they doing here? What do you mean? This is their land, they live here. This was during the Soviet time in the 1980s. They preserved the Hungarian language, Hungarian names, and all their national costumes. They are Hungarians, and they.
So you're talking about this historical epigenetic fingerprint that I'm talking about, that's echoing hundreds of years in these regions. I'm telling you, there's something very, very deep in what Putin is talking about with this ebb and flow in that area. Who owned what border when?
To be Hungarians. And of course, when now there is an infringement.
Well, that is, and there's a lot of it, though. I think many nations are upset about Transylvania as well, as you obviously know. But many nations feel frustrated by the redrawn borders of the wars of the 20th century,
right,
and wars going back 1,000 years, the ones that you mentioned. But the fact is that you didn't make this case in public until 2 years ago, February. And in the case that you made, which I read today, you explain at great length that you felt a physical threat from the West in NATO, including potentially a nuclear threat, and that's what got you to move. Is that
it's
a fair
expansion of NATO.
characterization of
That's the problem.
Я понимаю, что мои длинные диалоги, они...
I understand that my long speeches probably fall outside of the genre of the interview. That is why I asked you at the beginning, are we going to have a serious talk or a show? You said a serious talk. So bear with me, please. We're coming to the point where the Soviet Ukraine was established. Then in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, and everything that Russia had generously bestowed on Ukraine was dragged away by the latter. I'm coming to a very important
this point
point.
This point here is now dealing with the contemporary history that leads to the events that we have today now. Okay. But it's very important to keep that context that, you know what, Ukraine is not really a nation. Ukraine is a modern construct of a hodgepodge of a bunch of people.
Today's agenda.
Этот развал Советского Союза.
Thank you.
After all, the collapse of the Soviet Union was effectively initiated by the Russian leadership.
Тогда руководство России.
I do not understand what the Russian leadership was guided by at the time, but I suspect there were several reasons to think everything would be fine.
Первое. Ну, во-первых, я думаю, что руководство России исходило из того, что фундаментально.
I think that then Russian leadership believed that the fundamentals of the relationship between Russia and Ukraine were, in fact, a common language. More than 90% of the population there spoke Russian. Family ties. Every third person there had some kind of family or friendship ties. Common culture, common history. Finally, common faith, coexistence with a single state for centuries, and deeply interconnected economies. All of these were so fundamental. All these elements together make our good relationships inevitable. The second point is a very important one. I want you, as an American citizen, and your viewers to hear about this as well. The former Russian leadership assumed that the Soviet Union had ceased to exist, and therefore there were no longer any ideological dividing lines. Russia even agreed voluntarily and proactively to the collapse of the Soviet Union, and believed that this would be understood by the so-called civilized West as an invitation for cooperation and association. That is what Russia was expecting, both from the United States and the so-called collective West as a whole. There were smart people, including in Germany, Egon Bahr, a major politician of the Social Democratic Party, who insisted in his personal conversations with the Soviet leadership on the brink of the collapse of the Soviet Union that a new security system should be established in Europe. Help should be given to unify Germany, but a new system should be also established to include the United States, Canada, Russia, and other Central European countries. Yes, but NATO needs not to expand. That's what he said. If NATO expands, everything would be just the same as during the Cold War, only closer to Russia's borders. That's all. He was a wise old man, but no one listened to him. In fact, he got angry once. If, he said, you don't listen to me, I'm never setting my foot in Moscow once again. Everything happened just as he had said.
Yeah, well, of course, it did come true, and you've mentioned this many times. I think it's a fair point, and many in America thought that relations between Russia and the United States would be fine with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. That the opposite happened, but you've never explained why you think that happened, except to say that the West fears a strong Russia, but we have a strong China. The West does not seem very afraid of. What about
that
Russia,
is so disingenuous, Tucker. Get a little bit of history in the Asian Pacific, dude. Look at how we have positioned ourselves and aligned ourselves with Japan and South Korea with North Korea, and how by maintaining that instability in the northern area, it somewhat causes a problem for China. And this policy goes all the way back to Eisenhower when he was president. All right. What about this going back and forth between, is it a one state or a two state between China and Taiwan? So we're playing in that region. What about the domino effect during the Vietnam era, Tucker? I mean, that you don't even have, you're talking about history and not understanding it. My God. Come on, Tucker. You know better. Of course, the United States have positioned themselves for conflict and
convinced policymakers they had to take it down.
Запад боится сильного Китая больше, чем сильной России.
The West is afraid of strong China more than it fears a strong Russia, because Russia has 150 million people and China has 1.5 billion population, and its economy is growing by leaps and bounds, or 5% a year. It used to be even more. But that's enough for China. As Bismarck once put it, potentials are the most important. China's potential is enormous. It is the biggest economy in the world today in terms of purchasing power parity and the size of the economy. It has already overtaken the United States quite a long time ago, and it is growing at a rapid clip. Let's not talk about who is afraid of whom. Let's not reason in such terms. And let's get into the fact that after 1991, when Russia expected that it would be welcomed into the brotherly family of civilized nations, nothing like this happened. The trick is, I don't mean you personally when I say you. Of course, I'm talking about the United States. The promise was that NATO would not expand eastward, but it happened 5 times. There were 5 waves of expansion. We tolerated all that. We were trying to persuade them. We were saying, please don't. We are as bourgeois now as you are. We are a market economy and there's no communist party power. Let's negotiate. Moreover, I have also said this publicly before.
in this, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the fracturing of the USSR, the reconstituting and strengthening of Russia, all right, and the shock therapy that was going on with America coming in to try to make Russia more capitalistic and cause problems with their banking, and through Jeffrey Sachs, who was instrumental in the whole shock therapy process, and the expansion of NATO. These are all elements of a Western power, aka the United States, trying to fracture Russia so it can extract energy resources. Because at that time, you got to remember, this is the 90s. We didn't find all that fracking oil in the United States. Well, that fracturing didn't take place. Shock therapy was terrible. Putin started to go on the track that he was of kind of trying to be friendly with the United States, but getting pushback from, the Western powers because of this expansion from NATO. And then all of a sudden, what happens? We start having a war in Iraq, which is tied to oil. They're in the intelligence agencies in the United States. They want to fracture Russia for its resources and to reduce Russia's projection of power. That's their game plan. Instead of having some sort of partner, we should have aligned with Russia more than we aligned with China in terms of economics. It was a major mistake through the Clinton administration. And obviously a major mistake through both Bush administrations.
Was a moment when
Когда серая кошка пробежала.
a certain rift started growing between us. Before that, Yeltsin came to the United States. Remember, he spoke in Congress and said the good words. God bless America. Everything he said were signals. Let us in. Remember the developments in Yugoslavia before the Yeltsin was lavished with praise as soon as
But this is in the 90s. There was always an orchestrated effort to try to turn the next century into China, a century for China. You had power brokers that were selling the American people down the river, selling the Russian people down the river to strengthen China. Because they had all this FDI money going over there and they could make 10 or 15% or even more a return. because of that growing economy. That's what happened. That played out for 30 years. And now we have a war in Europe. Most likely we'll have a war in Asia. And we're already having wars in the Middle East. The CIA fucked the American person over.
Once in Yugoslavia started, he raised his voice in support of Serbs, and we couldn't but raise our voices for Serbs in their defense. I understand that there were complex processes underway there, I do, but Russia could not help raising its voice in support of Serbs, because Serbs are also a special and close to us nation, with Orthodox culture and so on. It's a nation that has suffered so much for generations. Well, regardless, what is important is that Yeltsin expressed his support. What did the United States do? In violation of international law and the UN Charter, it started bombing Belgrade. It was the United States that let the genie out of the bottle. Moreover, when Russia protested and expressed its resentment, what was said? The UN Charter and international law had become obsolete. Now everyone invokes international law, but at that time they started saying that everything was outdated. Everything had to be changed. Indeed, some things need to be changed, as the balance of power has changed. It's true, but not in this manner. Yeltsin was immediately dragged through the mud, accused of alcoholism, of understanding nothing, of knowing nothing. He understood everything, I assure you. Well, I became president in 2000. I thought, okay, the Yugoslav issue is over, but we should try to restore relations. Let's reopen the door that Russia had tried to go through. And moreover, I said it publicly, I can reiterate. At a meeting here in the Kremlin with the outgoing President Bill Clinton, right here in the next room, I said to him, I asked him, Bill, do you think if Russia asked to join NATO, do you think it would happen? Suddenly he said, you know, it's interesting. I think so. But in the evening, when we met for dinner, he said,
now remember, now this is important, and I'll kind of roll it back a little bit. All right. NATO has been expanding its operations, not just in the European theater, but also in the Middle Eastern theater and in the African theater. All right. So when he had this conversation, you have to remember there are like 5-year plans over at the Pentagon, 10-year plans, 50-year plans, right, of potential enemy and how we would respond with all these war games that take place. So during this time period of Clinton, okay, so we're talking about the you know, in the 90s, all right, they were already starting to have their eye on the Middle East and the need for expanding NATO. So if you have a president that's like going, oh, wait a minute here, you know, things are stabilizing in Europe. Maybe NATO should be expanded with Russia so it would be easier to handle the conflict in, you know, with this rising terrorism, quote, rising terrorism in the Middle East. But when you have a president going back to the policymakers and the puppet masters, and they start balking and saying, no, we don't want that, because they already wanted the resources from Russia and to try to fracture Russia. See, the whole point of this video is twofold. The historical context of Ukraine and this ebb and flow, and all the nefarious things that are going on, you know, on the economic front and on the international strategic front, you know, brought to you by the CIA and the bankers, you know, like Goldman Sachs. That's what the big thing here is. Now, I'm really willing to bet, and I haven't listened to other people's commentary, and we'll do a show, listen to other people's commentary about this, but I'm willing to bet that they don't go into that kind of fine detail of what's really going on with the CIA and the banking industry and trying to fracture Russia. While Meanwhile, they were making a ton of money. A ton of money in China. Now, as things start to evolve, you now start to see the pay to play that was going on with Biden during the Obama administration. And it starts to really, you start to sense that this deep state, or what I don't even like using the word deep state, this national security state, and how out of control it is, and why it needs to be truncated, if not completely dissolved.
No, it's not possible now.
Right, let me roll it back just a little bit, because
You can ask him. I think he will watch our interview. He'll confirm. When charter and international law have become obsolete. Now everyone invokes international law, but at that time they started saying that everything was outdated. Everything had to be changed. Indeed, some things need to be changed as the balance of power has changed. It's true, but not in this manner. Yeltsin was immediately dragged through the mud, accused of alcoholism, of understanding nothing, of knowing nothing. He understood everything, I assure you. Well, I became president in 2000. I thought, okay, the Yugoslav issue is over, but we should try to restore relations. Let's reopen the door that Russia had tried to go through. And moreover, I said it publicly, I can reiterate. At a meeting here in the Kremlin with the outgoing President Bill Clinton, right here in the next room, I said to him, I asked him, Bill, do you think if Russia asked to join NATO, do you think it would happen? Suddenly he said, it's interesting. I think so. But in the evening, when we met for dinner, he said, I've talked to my team. No, it's not possible now. You can ask him. I think he will watch our interview.
Not possible now. Think about that. We wouldn't have had the problem that we have today if the decision to bring Russia closer to the Western powers economically and militarily by integrating them into NATO, we wouldn't have the problem we have today. Biggest fucking mistake in the Clinton administration.
Confirm it. I wouldn't have said anything like that if it hadn't happened. Okay.
Were you
It's
sincere?
impossible now.
Would you have joined NATO?
Look, I asked the question, is it possible or not? And the answer I got was no. If I wasn't sincere in my desire to find out what the leadership position was.
But if he had said yes, would you have joined NATO?
If he had said yes, the process of rapprochement would have commenced. And eventually it might have happened if we had seen some sincere wish on the other side of our partners. But it didn't happen. Well, no means no. Okay, fine.
Why do you think that is? Just to get to motive. I know you're clearly bitter about it. I understand. But why do you think the West rebuffed you then? Why the hostility? Why did the end of the Cold War not fix the relationship? What motivates this from your...
Tucker, you need to understand the deep state, the national security state, wants to fracture Russia and take its oil. Don't you understand, Tucker? And they want to send FDI money, not to Russia, but to China. Fucking idiot.
point of view?
You said I was bitter about the answer. No, it's not bitterness. It's just a statement of fact. We're not bride and groom, bitterness, resentment. It's not about those kind of matters in such circumstances. We just realized we weren't welcome there, that's all. Okay, fine. But let's build relations in another manner. Let's look for common ground elsewhere.
And the reason why Putin is saying this is because they were hemorrhaging financially because of the shock therapy. And they wanted to be integrated, and they saw this economic activity between the United States and China, and they wanted to be a part of it. And the only thing that they really had that was strong was exporting energy to Europe. And that's what kept them afloat. But they wanted to be more integrated. And all these signals throughout 20 years, we just threw to the side, the curb. And now we may have in our lifetime tactical nuke detonation. See, this is the thing that they don't understand. They keep on, there's this sign, there's this sign of like, okay, stop the encroachment, stop the encroachment, stop the encroachment. And then all of a sudden, there's an emergent behavior that takes place, and then there's a war that ensues. The United States is riding a tiger here.
Response, you should ask your leaders. I can only guess why. Too big a country with its own opinion and so on. And the United States, I've seen how issues are being resolved in NATO. I will give you another example now concerning Ukraine. The US leadership exerts pressure, and all NATO members obediently vote, even if they do not like something. Now, I'll tell you what happened in this regard with Ukraine in 2008, although it's being discussed. I'm not going to open a secret to you, say anything new. Nevertheless, after that, we tried to build relations in different ways. For example, the events in the Middle East, in Iraq. We were building relations with the United States in a very soft, prudent, cautious manner. I repeatedly raised the issue that the United States should not support separatism or terrorism in the North Caucasus. But they continued to do it anyway. And political support, information support, financial support, even military support.
Now let's go back to what was going on in the Pentagon plan during Bush's administration. Syria, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan. Right? They had a plan to fracture the Middle East, and it didn't work. And then we had to pull out. And the American public was getting tired of a 20-year war. And we had to leave with our tail between our legs. Do you see the issue that is going on with the national security state? And how almost all of these problems that we have are because of the failed policies that we've made that are tied to either economic gain or resource accretion and fracturing of regions?
From the United States and its satellites for terrorist groups in the Caucasus. I once raised this issue with my colleague, also the President of the United States. He says, it's impossible. Do you have proof? I said, yes. I was prepared for this conversation, and I gave him that proof. He looked at it, and you know what he said? I apologize, but that's what happened. I'll quote. He says, well, I'm gonna kick their ass. We waited and waited for some response. There was no reply. I said to the FSB director, write to the CIA, what is the result of the conversation with President? He wrote once, twice, and then we got a reply. We have the answer in the archive. The CIA replied, we have been working with the opposition in Russia. We believe that this is the right thing to do, and we will keep on doing it. It's just ridiculous.
See, the CIA response was continue creating pressure for fracturing the region and creating an unstable border region around Russia. And the president of the United States didn't even want this to happen. Just like how Clinton thought that maybe more integration with Russia was a good thing for peace and prosperity. See, the policymakers and the money changers don't want peace. They want war. And until we get to the root cause, we're probably going to have a tactical nuke go off. And we're seeing through this interview, and it's a great interview. It's a great interview, right? Once in a while, you'll have the deer in the headlight constipation look from Tucker. So my hat's off to him. But the thing is, there's a deeper thing going on here. We are seeing the echo, the warning echo of a major war brewing in the future because of the failed decisions that we made in the last 25 years.
Oh, okay. We realized that it was out of the question.
Forces in opposition to you. So you're saying the CIA is trying to overthrow your government?
Yeah, of
Ну,
course.
конечно, имелось в виду в данном
Of
случае.
course, they meant in that particular case the separatists, the terrorists who fought with us in the Caucasus.
Называли.
That's who they called the opposition.
Это вот второй момент.
This is the second
Очень
point.
важный.
The third moment is a very important one. Is the moment when the U.S. missile defense system.
All right. So you have expansion of NATO, the inability to integrate with NATO, not helping economically, having more of an economic tie, then funding separatists. All right. This is poking the bear over many, many, many years. And I don't even think the president is doing it. The president of the United States. I don't think the president of the United States has that much power anymore. I think it's controlled by a group of people that are so entrenched that they have neutered the presidency's power. And this is the reason why they were so against Trump, because he's got a lot of balls. And he was calling them off on it.
Created
Начало.
the beginning.
Мы долго уговаривали.
We persuaded for a long time not to do it in the United States.
Меня пригласили в
Moreover,
отец Буша
after was invited by Bush Jr.'s father, Bush Sr., to visit his place on the ocean,
Там состоялась серьезная беседа,
I had a very serious conversation with President Bush and his team.
чтобы
I proposed that the United States, Russia, and Europe jointly create a missile defense system that we believe,
мы считаем,
if created unilaterally, threatens our security, despite the fact that the United States officially said that it was being created against missile threats from Iran. That was the justification for the deployment of the missile defense system.
Now think
I
about this.
suggested
Now,
working together.
there's a nuance here that maybe you didn't catch. We're making a defense missile system. We're going to unilaterally do it. We're not going to have Russia be a part of it. And it's to help prevent a missile, continental ballistic missile from Iran. Okay? The United States has no intentions of stopping the missile and the nuclear program in Iran. Take it in the context of what was going on during the Obama administration. Take it in the context of how Biden unwound the stance and the sanctions from Trump on Iran. Do you understand what Putin just said? Do you get it? I mean, let's let it sink in, because Americans are full of just eating Doritos and watching football. The American policy wonks and the national security state does not want Iran to not have ballistic missiles and nuclear capability. The United States wants it. That's what he's saying. And that we're creating a missile system against it. Why? Well, if you just go bomb Iran and destroy their capability, you no longer have to invest in a missile system. So the power brokers here, they're going to make a ton of money and be on boards and be part of this whole defense system. They're going to make a lot of money. While it was easier to actually go and bomb Iran and set on fire the Ayatollah's turban. It would cost less death would happen, and less insecurity in the region. But the United States doesn't want that. The United States wants them to have nuclear weapons. The United States wants them to have ICBMs. That's what Putin just said. Now, it's nuanced. I'm telling you, Putin is just pulled the, for the ones that didn't know, obviously some people that are listening to me and myself, we already knew this. But for many people around the world, and especially the American public, he just pulled the, you know, the veneer away to the Wizard of Oz of the US government and the CIA, and it's explaining this long arc of activity that's leading to instability in the region. And so when you say, stop the funding in Ukraine, you must be a Russian. What about the coup? And he'll get to it. What about the coup that was going on in 2014? See, this is all accelerating. So he gets into office in 2000, Putin. Now, there was this transition period between Yeltsin and Putin was kind of a lower underling to help with the state's assets being sold off to the private, you know, the private sector through the oligarchs. All right. And that's pretty much on how he rose to power for Putin. All right. But he kept on signaling to the Western powers in the United States, integrate with economically with Russia, and things will be better off. And we didn't do that. He had this Cold War mentality with also a mentality from Wall Street. Send everything to frickin' China so you can import deflation. Brought to you by Walmart. That's what happened. That's what happened. The United States does not want to solve the problem in Iran because there's too much money to be made.
Russia, the United States, and Europe, they said it was very interesting. They asked me, are you serious? I said, absolutely.
Let me ask, what year was this?
Ну, я не помню. Вот,
I don't remember.
в интернете, когда я был.
It is easy to find out on the internet. When I was in the USA at the invitation of Bush Sr., it is even easier to learn from someone I'm going to tell you about.
Они сказали, это очень интересно.
I was told it was very interesting. I said, just imagine if we could tackle such a global strategic security challenge together.
Right.
The world will change. We'll probably have disputes, probably economic and even political ones, but we could drastically change the situation in the world. He says, yes.
It would
And
radically change the UN, probably make it obsolete. And this whole military industrial complex would not have such a hold on the American public and even the Russian public. I'm telling you, we have to truncate the national security state. It's destroying America. It is what 1984 warned us about, and it is what Ayn Rand warned us about during, you know, with some of her writings. We're playing right into it. And these books are probably not even read in elementary school or high school anymore. I don't know. You know, we're losing the warning sign.
Are you serious? I said, of course. We need to think about it. I'm so.
Вот в этот кабинет.
I said, go ahead, please. Then Secretary of Defense Gates, former director of CIA, and Secretary of State Rice came in here in this cabinet, right here at this table. They sat on this table. Me, the foreign minister, the Russian defense minister on that side. They said to me, yes, we have thought about it. We agree. I said, thank God, great, but with some exceptions.
So twice you've described US presidents making decisions and then being undercut
Yeah,
by their agency heads.
exactly.
So it sounds like you're describing a system that's not run by the people who are elected in your telling.
Именно так.
That's right. That's right. In the end, they just told us to get lost. I'm not going to tell you the details because I think it's incorrect. After all, it was confidential conversation. But our proposal was declined. That's a fact. It was right then when I said, look, but then we will be forced to take countermeasures. We will create such strike systems that will certainly overcome missile defense systems. The answer was, we're not doing this against you, and you do what you want, assuming that it is not against us, not against the United States. I said, okay, very well. That's the way it went. And we created hypersonic systems with intercontinental range, and we continue to develop them. We're now ahead of everyone, the United States and the other countries, in terms
And
of.
here is the issue. At the time, the United States didn't want to play ball with Russia. They thought because they were economically weak and that potentially fracture because of all these pressure points that were going on at the time, that they wouldn't be developing hypersonic missile systems or weapon systems. Well, by the way, they have. And now we're behind the 8 ball. See, America has colossally fucked up. And it's not so much the president, even though we have a president that's an idiot out in office right now. It's this national security state. It's out of control. There are a lot, I spent a lot of time at the Harbor Club, all right? Listening to some of the, the lectures and, and the socialization, all right? There are a lot of people that flow in and out of the Harbor Club in New York and in Boston that are from CIA. They're ex-CIA. There are a lot of people that are flowing in and out because they're going through the Kennedy School, all right? And some of these people have written books, and some of them, do lectures, around the country and at the club, all right? And there's a common theme about them. They're all male. They all seem to have a deep history within the U.S. infrastructure. Like their family immigrated early into the American history, and they all wear beards. They all have gray beards or white beards, and they all say this phrase: "We have to worry about the existential threat from our adversaries." And that is international and domestic. And so they have this mindset of always being against Russia because they have this, many of them are from the Cold War mentality. And this idea of terrorism, so this is like the post 9/11 era CIA guy. And you have this idea of, well, the domestic terrorist, we got to hunt, we have to surveil because we don't know when something might pop up, either a cell or a lone wolf or whatever. And so they erode the civil liberties. And so they create systems, they create surveillance programs through the NSA to be able to collect all this data, to be able to, find the bad guy, even though the bad guy is actually at the CIA. I'll tell you, these people with these existential threats, this existential threat mentality that they have is what's destroying our country. And I have personally met these fuckers.
But development of hypersonic strike systems, and we are improving them every day. But it wasn't us. We proposed to go the other way, and we were pushed back. Now, about NATO's expansion to the east. Well, we were promised no NATO to the east, not an inch to the east, as we were told. And then what? They said, well, it's not enshrined on paper, so we'll expand. So there were 5 waves of expansion, the Baltic states, the whole of Eastern Europe, and so on. And now I come to the main thing. They have come to the Ukraine, ultimately. In 2008, at the summit in Bucharest, they declared that the doors for Ukraine and Georgia to join NATO were open. Now about how decisions are made there. Germany, France seem to be against it, as well as some other European countries. But then, as it turned out later, President Bush, and he's such a tough guy, a tough politician, as I was told later, he exerted pressure on us and we had to agree. It's ridiculous. It's like kindergarten. Where are the guarantees? What kindergarten is this? What kind of people are these? Who are they? You see, they were pressed, they agreed. And then they say, Ukraine won't be in the NATO, you know? I say, I don't know. I know you agreed in 2008. Why won't you agree in the future? Well, they pressed us then. I say, why won't they press you tomorrow? And you'll agree again. Well, it's nonsensical. Who's there to talk to? I just don't understand. We're ready to talk, but with who?
Now, for the people that are watching and the ones that are listening, write this down on a piece of paper. Okay, at the time about 41 minutes in, all right, you will see that Tucker raises his eyes in that strange kind of deer in the headlight constipation look, all right? And, you know, of course, sometimes I get thoughts and they kind of become bigger thoughts later down the road, but just listen to me and hear me out here. I am starting to get the feeling that Tucker is a white hat from the CIA. I can't prove it, but here's the things that I want you to start paying attention to. I feel that his raising of his eyebrows and widening his eyes, that constipation, you know, deer in the headlight look that he does, is a signal. And that the tie is a signal. Now, it's a regimental tie that he's wearing. Now, my understanding is that he did not graduate from college. I could be wrong on that, but someone would have to research that. But my understanding is that he did not graduate from college and that he applied to the CIA and was supposedly turned down. His father was tied to the CIA. That's a known fact. Now, you know, he comes from privilege, and it's possible that maybe he was a little bit, you know, less disciplined in, you know, in his college years and just didn't finish. That's possible. But I suspect that he is a white hat and that he signals with his eyes and his eyebrows, and that the regimental hat is a signal of what side he's on. Now, I'm colorblind, all right? So for people, I want you to put in Twitter or you know, in the video. So I have like color distinction issue. So I can't tell if he's wearing a yellow or maize with blue or black. I need you to tell me that. All right. There's a signal through the regimental tie that he has on. Now, I don't know specifically what that signal is, but I have this feeling that the regimental tie, and at the moments in time that he raises his eyes and eyebrows, and has that constipation look, is a signal. All right. Now, I could be wrong, but I just got this feeling that there are secret societies that speak in code, and it's not verbal. It's through symbols, and it's through facial expressions and handshakes. Something's up with our Tucker.
guarantees. None.
Не было там.
So they started to develop the territory of Ukraine. Whatever is there, I have told you the background, how this territory developed, what kind of relations there were with Russia. Every second or third person there has always had some ties with Russia. And during the elections in already independent, sovereign Ukraine, which gained its independence as a result of the Declaration of Independence. And by the way, it says that Ukraine is a neutral state, and in 2008, suddenly the doors or gates to NATO were open to it. Oh, come on. This is not how we agreed. Now, all the presidents that have come to power in Ukraine, they relied on electorate with a good attitude to Russia in one way or the other. This is the southeast of Ukraine. This is a large number of people. And it was very difficult to persuade this electorate, which had a positive attitude towards Russia. Viktor Yanukovych came to power, and how? The first time he won after President Kuchma, they organized a third round, which is not provided for in the constitution of Ukraine. This is a coup d'etat. Just imagine someone in the United States wouldn't like the outcome.
In 2014.
Before that. No, this was before that. After President Kuchma, Viktor Yanukovych won the elections. However, his opponents did not recognize that victory. The US supported the opposition, and the third round was scheduled. What is this? This is a coup. The US supported it, and the winner of the third round came to power. Imagine if in the US.
So you had a CIA that has this perspective that Russia's trying to influence elections, and the CIA is trying to do something to counter that, and they're causing all of this instability on top of the five pressure moments during the Putin administration that he just articulated in 45 minutes. These five pressure points. All right. You can kind of see that this is now starting to snowball, and that we know that the CIA overthrows governments and elections internationally and maybe domestically, probably domestically. It's crazy. I'll tell you, we're going right into war.
Something was not to someone's liking, and the third round of election, which the US Constitution does not provide for, was organized. Nonetheless, it was done in Ukraine. Okay, Viktor Yushchenko, who was considered a pro-Western politician, came to power. Fine, we have built relations with him as well. He came to Moscow with visits. We visited Kiev. I visited too. We met in an informal setting. If he's pro-Western, so be it. It's fine. Let people do their job. The situation should have developed inside independent Ukraine itself. As a result of Kuchma's leadership, things got worse, and Viktor Yanukovych came to power after all. Maybe he wasn't the best president and politician. I don't know. I don't want to give assessments. However, the issue of the association with the EU came up. We have always been lenient to this, suit yourself. But when we read through the Treaty of Association, it turned out to be a problem for us, since we had a free trade zone and open customs borders with Ukraine, which under this association had to open its borders for Europe, which could have led to flooding of our market. We said, no, this is not going to work. We shall close our borders with Ukraine then. The customs borders, that is. Yanukovych started to calculate how much Ukraine was going to gain, how much to lose, and said to his European partners, I need more time to think before signing. The moment he said that, the opposition began to take destructive steps, which were supported by the West. It all came down to Maidan and a coup in Ukraine.
So he did more trade with Russia than with the EU. Ukraine did.
Of course. It's not even the matter of trade volume, although for the most part it is. It is the matter of cooperation size, which the entire Ukrainian economy was based on. The cooperation size between the enterprises were very close since the times of the Soviet Union. One enterprise there used to produce components to be assembled both in Russia and Ukraine and vice versa. They used to be very close ties. A coup d'etat was committed, although I shall not delve into details now, as I find doing it inappropriate, the US told us. Calm Yanukovych down, and
this
we
is
will calm
interesting.
the opposition.
If you watch now at time 45:40, all right, of this interview, of what was published by Tucker on his channel, all right, he raises his eyebrows and eyes at that very moment. Now I'll tell you, I'm going to replay just a little bit of it and tell you the exact moment.
To work. We shall close our borders with Ukraine then. The customs borders, that is. Yanukovych started to calculate how much Ukraine was going to gain, how much to lose, and said to his European partners, I need more time to think before signing. The moment he said that, the opposition began to take destructive steps, which were supported by the West. It all came down to Maidan and a coup in Ukraine.
So he did more trade with Russia than with the EU. Ukraine did.
Ну, конечно. Ну, конечно, конечно.
Of course. It's not even the matter of trade volume, although for the most part it is. It is the matter of cooperation size, which the entire Ukrainian economy was based on. The cooperation size between the enterprises were very close since the times of the Soviet Union. One enterprise there used to produce components to be assembled both in Russia and Ukraine and vice versa. They used to be very close ties. A coup d'etat was committed, although I shall not delve into details now, as I find doing it inappropriate, the US told us.
Right here,
Yanukovych
right there,
down,
right
and
there
we
was when he raised his
calm the
eyebrows,
opposition.
talking about the
Let
coup
the
d'etat.
situation unfold.
I'll tell you, there's a signaling that's going on now. I don't know why Tucker's doing it. I don't know, who he's really representing. Maybe he's a white hat. Maybe there's something else going on that I don't know. But I'm telling you, there was a signal there.
In the scenario of a political settlement, we said, all right, agreed, let's do it this way. As the Americans requested, Yanukovych did use neither the armed forces nor the police, yet the armed opposition committed a coup in Kiev. What is that supposed to mean? Who do you think you are? I wanted to ask the then US leadership.
With the backing of whom?
With the backing of CIA, of course. The organization you wanted to join back in the day, as I understand. We should thank God they didn't let you in. Although,
I'll tell you, I'm going to replay that. But he's hinting, Putin is hinting that he is CIA. All right. Now, hear me out. I know this sounds a little conspiratorial. All right. I think Tucker and Anderson are CIA. I don't know if they're what part of the division, are they white hat, black hat, but they have infiltrated news networks. All right. I find that his educational background and his father's background, seems to kind of dovetail into the story of him getting in somehow, some way. All right. And he seems to have been somewhat protected, being able to grow a big channel when he left Fox. All right. Now, so Putin, now when Putin says this, when you look at around timeline 46 minutes and 23 seconds, just a little bit before that, when Putin is saying when you wanted to join the CIA, there is no facial expression, none, zero, none from Tucker. While you watch at these different moments, he has these like wide-eyed, constipation look, deer in the headlight look, or an over laughter that he does that's annoying. All right. So that means that he hit a pressure point. Putin hit a pressure point on Tucker, and Tucker was trained not to react. Now, if you don't believe me, talk to a bunch of psychologists about facial expressions and mannerisms, and I'm willing to bet that you'll start seeing that there are signals that are taking place here in this interview. Now, I'm going to just rewind it just a little bit, because Putin is hinting, like Russian, sometimes Russian humor is dry and you can't take it like literally, and there's a nuance to it. I think Putin is hinting that, oh, you wanted to join the CIA and you weren't able to get in. No facial expression on Tucker, while Putin is hinting that he was put into the CIA and that he knows it. And Tucker knows that he knows.
A coup d'etat was committed, although I shall not delve into details now, as I find doing it inappropriate. The US told us, calm Yanukovych down and we will calm the opposition. Let the situation unfold in the scenario of a political settlement. We said, all right, agreed, let's do it this way. As the Americans requested, Yanukovych did use neither the armed forces nor the police, yet the armed opposition committed a coup in Kiev. What is that supposed to mean? Who do you think you are? I wanted to ask the then US leadership.
With the backing of whom?
With the backing of CIA, of course. The organization you wanted to join back in the day, as I understand. We should thank God they didn't let you in, although it is a serious organization. I understand. My former
I'm telling you, man, Putin just called Tucker right at that moment, 4630, saying, you're CIA, dude. Trust me. He knows, and Tucker didn't even flinch.
Then the first main directorate, Soviet Union's intelligence service. They have always been our opponents. A job is a job. Technically, they did everything right. They achieved their goal of changing the government. However, from a political standpoint, it was a colossal mistake. Surely it was political leadership's miscalculation. They should have seen what it would evolve into. So, in 2008, the doors of NATO were open for Ukraine. In 2014, there was a coup. They started persecuting those who did not accept the coup, and it was indeed a coup. They created a threat to Crimea, which we had to take under our protection. They launched a war in Donbass in 2014 with the use of aircraft and artillery against civilians. This is when it all started. There's a video of aircraft attacking Donetsk from above. They launched a large-scale military operation, then another one. When they failed, they started to prepare the next one. All this against the background of military development of this territory and opening of NATO's doors. How could we not express concern over what was happening? From our side, this would have been a culpable negligence. That's what it would have been. It's just that the US political leadership pushed us to the line we could not cross, because doing so could have ruined Russia itself. Besides, we could not leave our brothers in faith, in fact, a part of Russian people, in the face of this war machine.
But that was 8 years before the current conflict started. So what was the trigger for you? What was the moment where you decided you had to do this?
Initially, it was the coup in Ukraine that provoked the conflict. By the way, back then the representatives of 3 European countries, Germany, Poland, and France, arrived. They were the guarantors of the signed agreement between the government of Yanukovych and the opposition. They signed it as guarantors. Despite that, the opposition committed a coup, and all these countries pretended that they didn't remember that they were guarantors of the peaceful settlement. They just threw it in the stove right away, and nobody recalls that. I don't know if the US know anything about the agreement between the opposition and the authorities, and its three guarantors who, instead of bringing this whole situation back in the political field, supported the coup. Although it was meaningless, believe me, because President Yanukovych agreed to all conditions. He was ready to hold an early election, which he had no chance of winning, frankly speaking. Everyone knew that. Then why the coup? Why the victims? Why threatening Crimea? Why launching an operation in Donbass? This I do not understand. That is exactly what the miscalculation is. CIA did its job to complete the coup. I think one of the deputy secretaries of state said that it cost a large sum of money, almost 5 billion. But the political mistake was colossal. Why would they have to do that? All this could have been done legally, without victims, without military action, without losing Crimea. We would have never considered to even lift a finger if it hadn't been for the bloody developments on Maidan. Because we agreed with the fact that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, our borders should be along the borders of former Union's republics. We agreed to that, but we never agreed to NATO's expansion, and moreover, we never agreed that Ukraine would be in NATO. We did not agree to NATO bases there without any discussion with us. For decades, we kept asking, don't do this, don't do that. And what triggered the latest events? Firstly, the current Ukrainian leadership declared that it would not implement the Minsk agreements, which had been signed, as you know, after the events of 2014 in Minsk, where the plan of peaceful settlement in Donbass was set forth. But no, the current Ukrainian leadership, foreign minister, all other officials, and then president himself said that they don't like anything about the Minsk agreements. In other words, they were not going to implement it. A year or a year and a half ago, former leaders of Germany and France said openly to the whole world that they indeed signed the Minsk agreements, but they never intended to implement them. They simply led us by the nose.
Was there anyone for you to talk to? Did you call a U.S. President, Secretary of State, and say, if you keep militarizing Ukraine with NATO forces, this is going to be we're going to act?
We talked about this all the time. We addressed the United States and European countries' leadership to stop these developments immediately, to implement the Minsk agreements. Frankly speaking, I didn't know how we were going to do this, but I was ready to implement them. These agreements were complicated for Ukraine. They included lots of elements of those Donbass territories' independence. That's true. However, I was absolutely confident, and I'm saying this to you now. I honestly believe that if we managed to convince the residents of Donbass, and we had to work hard to convince them to return to the Ukrainian statehood, then gradually the wounds would start to heal. When this part of territory reintegrated itself into a common social environment, when the pensions and social benefits were paid again, all the pieces would gradually fall into place. No, nobody wanted that. Everybody wanted to resolve the issue by military force only. But we could not let that happen. And the situation got to the point when the Ukrainian side announced, no, we will not do anything. They also started preparing for military action. It was they who started the war in 2014. Our goal is to stop this war. And we did not start this war in 2022. This is an attempt to stop it.
Do you think you've stopped it now? I mean, have you achieved your aims?
No, we haven't achieved our aims yet because one of them is denazification. This means the prohibition of all kinds of neo-Nazi movements. This is one of the problems that we discussed during the negotiation process, which ended in Istanbul early this year. And it was not our initiative because we were told by the Europeans, in particular, that it was necessary to create conditions for the final signing of the documents. My counterparts in France and Germany said, how can you imagine them signing a treaty with a gun to their heads? The troops should be pulled back from Kiev. I said, all right. We withdrew the troops from Kiev. As soon as we pulled back our troops from Kiev, our Ukrainian negotiators immediately threw all our agreements reached in Istanbul into the bin and got prepared for a long-standing armed confrontation with the help of the United States and its satellites in Europe. That is how the situation has developed, and that is how it looks now.
But what is, pardon my ignorance, what is denazification? What would that mean?
Да, вот я как раз хочу сейчас об этом сказать. Это очень важный вопрос. Денацификация.
That is what I want to talk about right now. It is a very important issue. Denazification. After gaining independence, Ukraine began to search, as some Western analysts say, its identity. And it came up with nothing better than to build this identity upon some false heroes who collaborated with Hitler. I have already said that in the early 19th century, when the theorists of independence and sovereignty of Ukraine appeared, they assumed that an independent Ukraine should have very good relations with Russia. But due to the historical development, those territories were part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Poland, where Ukrainians were persecuted and treated quite brutally, as well as were subject to cruel behavior. There were also attempts to destroy their identity. All this remained in the memory of the people. When World War II broke out, part of this extremely nationalist elite collaborated with Hitler, believing that he would bring them freedom. The German troops, even the SS troops, made Hitler's collaborators do the dirtiest work of exterminating the Polish and Jewish population. Hence this brutal massacre of the Polish and Jewish population, as well as the Russian population.
So, and I'm sure ones that are watching and listening know this fact, but, for the ones that don't, in the early days of the extermination of the Jews through Nazi policy, the early days, they were just having soldiers shoot the victims, all right, the gypsies and the Jews. The problem took place where there were psychological problems with soldiers, with so many people that they were killing. So that started to lead down the road of trying to figure out other means of extermination. And so the chemists were starting to play around with this idea of, well, why not just do gas chambers? This is kind of like the early beginnings of the gas chambers. But before that took place, they were trying to, quote, outsource the extermination of people through other individuals doing the dirty work. All right, not the German soldier, because in the thought process of Germany, it was to try to protect the psychology of the soldier, and just outsource it to someone else. Eventually, it leads to how to do this more mechanized, more robotic, more, just put them into a chamber and then gas them. So that whole final solution, right, that they were working out, evolved over time. And it started because of the psychological effects of the soldiers when they were killing so many people. So, Putin is right about the history of this.
Которые с Гитлером сотрудничали. Вот отсюда вот эта жестокая резня.
This was led by the persons who are well known, Bandera, Shukevich. It was those people who were made national heroes. That is the problem. And we are constantly told that nationalism and neo-Nazism exist in other countries as well. Yes, they are seedlings, but we uproot them, and other countries fight against it. But Ukraine is not the case. These people have been made into national heroes in Ukraine. Monuments to those people have been erected. They are displayed on flags. Their names are shouted by crowds that walk with torches, as it was in Nazi Germany.
Они на флагах, они их имена кричат.
These were people who exterminated Poles, Jews, and Russians.
Это люди, которые уничтожали поляков, евреев, русских.
It is necessary to stop this practice and prevent the dissemination of this concept. I say that Ukrainians are part of the one Russian people. They say, no, we are a separate people. Okay, fine. If they consider themselves a separate people, they have the right to do so, but not on the basis of Nazism, the Nazi ideology.
Would you be satisfied with the territory that you have now?
Нет, сейчас закончим. Вы же задали вопрос по неонацизму и денацификации.
I will finish answering the question. You just asked a question about neo-Nazism and denazification. Look, the president of Ukraine visited Canada. The story is well known, but being silenced in the Western countries. The Canadian Parliament introduced a man who, as the Speaker of the Parliament said, fought against the Russians during the World War II. Well, who fought against the Russians during the World War II? Hitler and his accomplices. It turned out that this man served in the SS troops. He personally killed Russians, Poles, and Jews. The SS troops consisted of Ukrainian nationalists who did this dirty work. The president of Ukraine stood up with the entire Parliament of Canada and applauded this man. How can this be imagined? The president of Ukraine himself, by the way, is a Jew by nationality.
Really, my question is, what do you do about it? I mean, Hitler's been dead for 80 years. Nazi Germany no longer exists. And so, true. And so, I think what you're saying is you want to extinguish or at least control Ukrainian nationalism, but how? How do you do that?
Послушайте меня. Ваш вопрос очень тонкий.
Listen to me. Your question is very subtle, and I can tell you what I think. Do not take offense.
Of course.
Он казалось бы тонкий, он очень противный.
This question appears to be subtle. It is quite pesky.
Значит,
You say Hitler has been dead for so many years, 80 years, but his example lives on. People who exterminated Jews, Russians, and Poles are alive. And the president, the current president of today's Ukraine, applauds him in the Canadian Parliament, gives a standing ovation. Can we say that we have completely uprooted this ideology if what we see is happening today? That is what denazification is in our understanding. We have to get rid of those people who maintain this concept and support this practice and try to preserve it. That is what denazification is. That is what we mean.
Right. My question was a little more specific. It was, of course, not a defense of Nazis, neo or otherwise. It was a practical question. You don't control the entire country. You don't control Kiev. You don't seem like you want to. So how do you eliminate a culture or an ideology or feelings or a view of history in a country that you don't control, what do you do about that?
А вы знаете, как вам не покажется странным, в ходе переговоров в Стамбуле,
You know, as strange as it may seem to you, during the negotiations at Istanbul, we did agree that we have it all in writing. Neo-Nazism would not be cultivated in Ukraine, including that it would be prohibited at the legislative level. Mr. Carson, we agreed on that. This, it turns out, can be done during the negotiation process.
Now, step back and take a look at domestically what's going on in the United States with some of these embedded groups. During rallies for Trump, it seems as though there's kind of like some sort of operation that's going on to try to stir problems, where people are dressed all in the same kind of uniform, same khaki pants and the same t-shirt and the same hat and the same scarf and the same glasses. All right. There are operations that are taking place in the United States try to entrap MAGA supporters or pro-constitutionalists. All right. There are operations that are taking place by the FBI and the CIA to try to create a problem within these rallies. So they would play it on CNN saying how bad, a Trump supporter is. They must be a neo-Nazi, a right-wing nut. Now, how far, how much more do you think the CIA is doing to cultivate this type of racial hatred through this neo-Nazification in Ukraine? I wouldn't be surprised that it's being fanned, it's being cultivated by the CIA. You're seeing it happening in our own country right now. So it's not that, a stretch of the imagination to start asking questions like, what kind of operations are going on in Ukraine? How involved are the CIA in terms of cultivating neo-Nazism? On top of the cultural, history of the region with this problem. Most likely, we are fanning the flames.
And there's nothing humiliating for Ukraine as a modern civilized state. Is any state allowed to promote Nazism? It is not, is it? Oh, that is it.
Will there be talks, and why haven't there been talks about resolving the conflict in Ukraine, peace talks?
они были, они дошли до очень высокой стадии согласования позиций. Сложно.
They have been.
Another thought that came to my mind, okay, and I want to replay it. I'm gonna roll it back just a couple seconds or so, a few seconds here.
Otherwise, it was a practical question. You don't control the entire country. You don't control Kiev. You don't seem like you want to. So how do you eliminate a culture or an ideology or feelings or a view of history in a country that you don't control? What do you do about that?
А вы знаете, как вам не покажется странным, в ходе переговоров в Стамбуле,
You know, as strange as it may seem to you, during the negotiations at Istanbul, we did agree that we have it all in writing. Neo-Nazism would not be cultivated in Ukraine, including that it would be prohibited at the legislative level. Mr. Carson.
Prohibitive at the legislative level, right? This agreement was started to be, discussed in Istanbul, dealing with Ukraine, all right? There's a nuance with Putin. Putin's a very smart guy, all right? He's hinting to Tucker and to the American public denazification in Ukraine, but it's also not acceptable for Nazification to be cultivated in the United States. which the CIA is doing. See that little nuance that he just did? Just watch very carefully.
Read on that. This, it turns out, can be done during the negotiation process. And there's nothing humiliating for Ukraine as a modern civilized state. Is any state allowed to promote Nazism? It is not, is it? That is it.
Will there be talks?
All right. So he basically, any state promoting Nazism is not acceptable. And then all of a sudden Tucker switches the subject.
Haven't there been talks about resolving the conflict in Ukraine?
He totally shifts the conversation.
Они были, они дошли до очень высокой стадии согласования позиций.
They have been. They reached a very high stage of coordination of positions.
What Putin just did was that he was saying there's Nazification that's going on in Ukraine that has to be stopped. In that he hinted, wink, wink, CIA is involved. And oh, by the way, no nation should be cultivating this, even domestically. AKA what's going on with the CIA trying to infiltrate rallies for Trump. That's what he just said. He's very nuanced, though.
But still, they were almost finalized. But after we withdrew our troops from Kiev, as I had already said, the other side threw away all these agreements and obeyed the instructions of Western countries, European countries, and the United States to fight Russia to the bitter end. Moreover, the president of Ukraine has legislated a ban on negotiating with Russia. He signed a decree forbidding everyone to negotiate with Russia. But how are we going to negotiate if he forbade himself and everyone to do this? We know that he is putting forward some ideas about this settlement, but in order to agree on something, we need to have a dialogue. Is that not right?
Well, but you wouldn't be speaking to the Ukrainian president, you'd be speaking to the American president. When was the last time you spoke to Joe Biden?
I cannot remember when I talked to him. I do not remember. We can look it up.
You don't remember?
No. Why? Do I have to remember everything? I have my own things to do. We have domestic political affairs.
Well, he's funding the war that you're fighting, so I would think that would be memorable.
Well, yes, he funds, but I talked to him before the special military operation, of course. And I said to him then, by the way, I will not go into details, I never do, but I said to him then, I believe that you are making a huge mistake of historic proportions by supporting everything that is happening there in Ukraine by pushing Russia away. I told him repeatedly, by the way. I think that would be correct if I stop here.
What did he say?
Ask him, please. It is easier for you. You are a citizen of the United States. Go and ask him. It is not appropriate for me to comment on our conversation.
But you haven't spoken to him since before February of 2022.
No, we haven't spoken. Certain contacts are being maintained, though. Speaking of which, do you remember what I told you about my proposal to work together on a missile defense system?
Yes.
You can ask all of them. All of them are safe and sound, thank God. The former president, Condoleezza, is safe and sound, and I think Mr. Gates and the current director.
All right. So there was a signal that was just that just happened there, okay? And it wasn't through the facial expressions of Tucker or anything like that. Putin has set the ball in motion. This is where you can see that this boy is deep, all right? He set the ball in motion so Tucker can now go to these individuals and have other interviews to expound on what just Putin said, all right? Putin is like giving you kind of a, his surface perspective on a particular topic, all right, like the missile defense. But then now Tucker, what Putin just said was go interview these different individuals like Rice and whatnot, all right? So Tucker will be able to ask questions if he has the balls to do it and start asking, why did you not allow Russia to participate in a missile defense system against Iran? Because both countries are potentially at risk. And you'll get to the root cause of the problem. And that is a national security state and policy wonks. They want to destroy Russia, fracture Russia, and extract the oil. And he didn't have to say it so belligerently. He just had to just hint it. See, Putin is, when he's in a calm state, which he is, in a parasympathetic state, if you want to use doctoral words, right? But in a parasympathetic state, he will just hint, right? He's not going to pound on the table. Go and talk to Rice. Go and talk to your president. He's saying, here are the people that were in the room that didn't want to play while we were trying to reach out. So it sets in motion additional interviews and additional questions. And if they go no comment, then you start asking questions like, why? Condoleezza Rice, why? Miss Know It All About Russia, why? And you'll start to get to the point where their decisions actually set in motion with the catastrophe that we have today. Meanwhile, in those circles, those international circles, they're put on a pedestal like they're gods. Very nuanced in what Putin just entertained with Tucker.
Of the intelligence agency, Mr. Burns, the then ambassador to Russia, in my opinion, are very successful ambassador. They were all witnesses to these conversations. Ask them. Same here. If you are interested in what Mr. President Biden responded to me, ask him. At any rate, I talked to him about it.
I'm definitely interested, but from the outside, it seems like this could devolve or evolve into something that brings the entire world into conflict and could initiate a nuclear launch. And so why don't you just call Biden and say, let's work this out?
What's there to work out? It's very simple. I repeat, we have contacts through various agencies. I will tell you what we are saying on this matter and what we are conveying to the US leadership. If you really want to stop fighting, you need to stop supplying weapons. It will be over within a few weeks. That's it. And then we can agree on some terms. Before you do that, stop. What's easier? Why would I call him? What should I talk to him about? Or beg him for what?
And what messages should I get back?
You're going to deliver such and such weapons to Ukraine? Oh, I'm afraid. Please don't. What is there to talk about?
Do you think NATO is worried about this becoming a global war or a nuclear conflict?
At least that's what they're talking about. And they're trying to intimidate their own population with an imaginary Russian threat. This is an obvious fact. And thinking people, not Philistines, but thinking people, analysts, those who are engaged in real politics, just smart people, understand perfectly well that this is a fake. They're trying to fuel the Russian threat.
The threat I think you're referring to is a Russian invasion of Poland, Latvia, expansionist behavior. Can you imagine a scenario where you send Russian troops to Poland?
только в одном случае, если останется стабильным.
Only in one case, if Poland attacks Russia. Why? Because we have no interest in Poland, Latvia, or anywhere else. Why would we do that? We simply don't have any interest. It's just threat mongering.
Well, the argument, I know you know this, is that, well, he invaded Ukraine. He has territorial aims across the continent, and you're saying unequivocally you don't.
Абсолютно, это абсолютно исключено.
It is absolutely out of the question. You just don't have to be any kind of analyst. It goes against common sense to get involved in some kind of a global war.
Глобальная война поставить на грань.
And a global war will bring all humanity to the brink of destruction. It's obvious.
Вот. И есть, конечно, средства.
There are certainly means of deterrence. They have been scaring everyone with us all along. Tomorrow, Russia will use tactical nuclear weapons. Tomorrow, Russia will use that. No, the day after tomorrow. So what?
Выбить из налогоплательщиков.
In order to extort additional money from US taxpayers and European taxpayers in the confrontation with Russia in the Ukrainian theater of war. The goal is to weaken Russia as much as possible.
One of our senior United States senators from the state of New York, Chuck Schumer, said yesterday, I believe, that we have to continue to fund the Ukrainian effort, or U.S. soldiers, citizens could wind up fighting there. How do you assess that?
Это провокация.
This is a provocation, and a cheap provocation at that.
Солдаты должны воевать.
I do not understand why American soldiers should fight in Ukraine. There are mercenaries from the United States there. The bigger number of mercenaries comes from Poland.
I'll tell you, there is no doubt that special forces are in Ukraine and they were helping strategic moves and targeting, during this conflict. There's no doubt about it. No doubt. No doubt. No doubt. We're fueling the flames to this.
It's from the United States in second place, and mercenaries from Georgia in third place.
Безусловно.
Well, if somebody has the desire to send regular troops, that would certainly bring humanity to the brink of very serious global conflict. This is obvious. Do the United States need this? What for? Thousands of miles away from your national territory. Don't you have anything better to do? You have issues on the border, issues with migration, issues with the national debt, more than $33 trillion. You have nothing better to do, so you should fight in Ukraine? Wouldn't it be better to negotiate with Russia, make an agreement, already understanding the situation that is developing today, realizing that Russia will fight for its interests to the end? And realizing this, actually return to common sense, start respecting our country and its interests, and look for certain solutions. It seems to me that this is much smarter and more rational.
Who blew up Nord Stream?
You for sure.
I was busy that day. Nate, I did not blow up Nord Stream. Thank you, though.
У вас лично, может быть, есть тайны, у вас лично.
You personally may have an alibi, but the CIA has no such alibi.
Do you have evidence that NATO or the CIA did it?
Знаете,
You know, to me,
I'm
this is much
gonna roll
smarter
back
and
that
more
point. I'm gonna roll back that point, but most likely it was our own Navy SEALs that knocked it out. All right. I don't think it was CIA. Now there might have been some sort of joint operation where it was, some sort of planning and some sort of strategic initiative from the CIA through SAC and JSOC, where they deployed probably Navy SEALs. I think the United States took it out. All right. But there was a nuance there. All right. Now listen to the nuance.
Who blew up Nord Stream?
You for sure.
I was busy that day.
Right, you for sure. He took his hands and pointed to Tucker, both hands open. All right. There's a signal there saying, well, no, Tucker didn't do it, obviously, but it's that little hint, hint. I think you're CIA, dude. And that there was a facial expression with Tucker that he's biting his lips, pursing his lips. And this is at about 1 hour and 11 minutes,
And do you
42 seconds.
I did not blow up Nord Stream. Thank you, though.
У вас лично, может быть, есть тайна, у вас лично.
You personally may have an alibi, but the CIA has no such alibi.
Do you have evidence that NATO or CIA did it?
Знаете,
You know, I won't get into details, but people always say in such cases, look for someone who is interested. But in this case, we should not only look for someone who is interested, but also for someone who has capabilities. Because there may be many people interested, but not all of them are capable of sinking to the bottom of the Baltic Sea and carrying out this explosion. These two components should be connected.
Exactly. And who has that capability? UK, the United States, and Russia.
Interested and who is capable of doing it.
But I'm confused. I mean, that's the biggest act of industrial terrorism ever, and it's the largest emission of CO2 in history. Okay, so if you had evidence, and presumably given your security services, rental services, you would, that NATO, the US, CIA, the West did this, why wouldn't you present it and win a propaganda victory?
In the war of propaganda, it is very difficult to defeat the United States because the United States controls all the world's media and many European media. The ultimate beneficiary of the biggest European media are American financial institutions. Don't you know that? So it is possible to get involved in this work, but it is cost prohibitive, so to speak. We can simply shine the spotlight on our sources of information, and we will not achieve results. It is clear to the whole world what happened, and even American analysts talk about it directly. It's true.
Yes, but here's a question you may be able to answer. You worked in Germany, famously. The Germans clearly know that their NATO partner did this, but it damaged their economy greatly. It may never recover. Why are they being silent about it? That's very confusing to me. Why wouldn't the Germans say something about it?
This also confuses me. But today's German leadership is guided by the interests of the collective West rather than its national interests. Otherwise, it is difficult to explain the logic of their action or inaction. After all, it is not only about Nord Stream 1, which was blown up, and the Nord Stream 2 was damaged. But one pipe is safe and sound, and gas can be supplied to Europe through it. But Germany does not open it. We're ready, please. There's another route through Poland called Yamal Europe, which also allows for large flow. Poland has closed it, but Poland taxes from the German hand. It receives money from the pan-European funds, and Germany is the main donor to these pan-European funds. Germany feeds Poland to a certain extent, and they close their route to Germany. Why? I don't understand. Ukraine, to which the Germans supply weapons and give money. Germany is the second sponsor of the United States in terms of financial aid to Ukraine. There are two gas routes through Ukraine. They simply close one route, the Ukrainians. Open the second route and please get gas from Russia. They do not open it. Why don't the Germans say? look, guys, we give you money and weapons. Open up the valve, please. Let the gas from Russia pass through for us. We're buying liquefied gas at exorbitant prices in Europe, which brings the level of our competitiveness and economy in general down to zero. Do you want us to give you money? Let us have the decent existence. Make money for our economy, because this is where the money we give you comes from. They refuse to do so. Why? Ask them. That is what is like in their heads. Those are highly incompetent people.
Well, maybe the world is breaking into two hemispheres, one with cheap energy, the other without. And I want to ask you that if we're now a multipolar world, obviously we are.
There is a nuance that's just going to take place with Putin, where he's been spending some time with doctors. All right. Now, when you watch this interview, he doesn't seem to have any sort of signs of illness that I could see. All right. And I've been watching very closely. But the way he's going to structure his sentences and the words that he uses give you the impression that he's been spending some time with doctors. All right. So pay attention to the nuance here.
Blocks of alliances. Who is in each side, do you think?
Listen, you have said that the world is breaking into two hemispheres. A human brain is divided into two hemispheres. One is responsible for one type of activities, the other one is more about creativity and so on. But it is still one and the same head. The world should be a single whole. Security should be shared rather than meant for the golden billion. That is the only scenario where the world could be stable, sustainable, and predictable. Until then, while the head is split in two parts, it is an illness, a serious adverse condition. It is a period of severe disease that the world is going through now. But I think that thanks to honest journalism, this work is akin to the work of the doctors. This could somehow be remedied.
Well, let's just give one example, the US dollar, which has kind of united the world in a lot of ways, maybe not to your advantage, but certainly to ours. Is that going away as the reserve currency, the economy of the universe accepted currency? How have sanctions, do you think, changed the dollar's place in the world?
You know, to use the dollar as a tool of foreign policy struggle is one of the biggest strategic mistakes made by the US political leadership. The dollar is the cornerstone of the United States power. I think everyone understands very well that no matter how many dollars are printed, they're quickly dispersed all over the world. Inflation in the United States is minimal. It's about 3 or 3.4%, which is, I think, totally acceptable for the US. But they won't stop printing. What does the debt of $33 trillion tell us about? It is about the emission. Nevertheless, it is the main weapon used by the United States to preserve its power across the world. As soon as the political leadership decided to use the US dollar as a tool of political struggle, a blow was dealt to this American power. I would not like to use any strong language, but it is a stupid thing to do and a grave mistake. Look at what is going on in the world. Even the United States allies are now downsizing their dollar reserves. Seeing this, everyone starts looking for ways to protect themselves. But the fact that the United States applies restrictive measures to certain countries, such as placing restrictions on transactions, freezing assets, etc., causes great concern and sends a signal to the whole world. What did we have here? Until 2022, about 80% of Russian foreign trade transactions were made in US dollars and euros. US dollars accounted for approximately 50% of our transactions with third countries, while currently it is down to 13%. It wasn't us who banned the use of the US dollar. We had no such intention. It was decision of the United States to restrict our transactions in US dollars. I think it is complete foolishness from the point of view of the interests of the United States itself and its taxpayers, as it damages the US economy, undermines the power of the United States across the world. By the way, our transactions in yuan accounted for about 3%. Today, 34% of our transactions are made in rubles, and about as much, a little over 34% in yuan. Why did the United States do this? My only guess is self-conceit. They probably thought it would lead to full collapse, but nothing collapsed. Moreover, other countries, including oil producers, are thinking of and already accepting payments for oil in yuan. Do you even realize what is going on or not? Does anyone in the United States realize this? What are you doing? You're cutting yourself off. All experts say this. Ask any intelligent and thinking person in the United States what the dollar means for the US. You're killing it with your own hands.
I think that's a fair, I think it's a fair assessment. The question is what comes next, and maybe you trade one colonial power for another, much less sentimental and forgiving colonial power. I mean, is the BRICS, for example, in danger of being completely dominated by the Chinese economy in a way that's not good for their sovereignty? Do you worry about that?
Well, we have heard those boogeyman stories before. It is a boogeyman story. We're neighbors with China. You cannot choose neighbors just as you cannot choose close relatives. We share a border of 1,000 kilometers with them. This is number one. Second, we have a centuries-long history of coexistence. We're used to it. Third, China's foreign policy philosophy is not aggressive. Its idea is to always look for compromise, and we can see that. The next point is as follows. We are always told the same boogeyman story, and here it goes again, through an euphemistic form, but it is still the same boogeyman story. The cooperation with China keeps increasing. The pace at which China's cooperation with Europe is growing is higher and greater than that of the growth of Chinese-Russian cooperation. Ask Europe.
And this boogeyman story that he's talking about is the national security state always trying to find an enemy to make sure that the money is flowing from Congress to the military weapon development. That's all this is about.
Aren't they afraid? They might be, I don't know. But they are still trying to access China's market at all costs, especially now that they are facing economic problems. Chinese businesses are also exploring the European market. Do Chinese businesses have small presence in the United States? Yes, the political decisions are such that they are trying to limit their cooperation with China. It is to your own detriment, Mr. Tucker, that you are limiting cooperation with China. You are hurting yourself. It is a delicate matter, and there are no silver bullet solutions, just as it is with the dollar. So, before introducing any illegitimate sanctions, illegitimate in terms of the Charter of the United Nations, one should think very carefully. For decision makers, this appears to be a problem.
So you said a moment ago that the world would be.
Let me just do a quick commercial to help the store out. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the toothpaste that I offer. It's a structural nano silver toothpaste that'll help to whiten your teeth, freshen your breath, reduce pathogens, and help with cardiovascular disease. So please go to my store, get a couple tubes of this toothpaste. It's the best toothpaste that you can get. It has no fluoride in it. It has structural nanosilver, and it'll help with your health. Also, please go to my store and get the structural nanosilver gel that I offer. It will neutralize pathogens. It'll help heal your skin. You can improve your skin health by using this every day. Put it on your skin at night and exfoliate in the morning. I also have lozenges and drops. So please get your drops and lozenges from my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. Links in the description of this video and on X that's pinned. So please get the blueberry structural nanosilver drops in a 100 count. I also have green apple lozenges in a 20 count. Manuka honey lozenges in a 21 count. Honey and lemon drops in a 100 count. And a new product, which is the elderberry zinc structural nanosilver lozenges, also in a 20 count. And also, please, to help improve your cardiovascular health by maintaining a proper lipid profile, get the omega-3 that I have on my store. Take this every day to help improve your lipid profile for your blood. You want to bring down your LDL, bring down your triglycerides, bring down your cholesterol, and bring up your HDL. You can do that by proper diet, proper supplementation, and proper exercise. So take my advice and go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the omega-3 supplement.
If it weren't broken into competing alliances, if there was cooperation globally. One of the reasons you don't have that is because the current American administration is dead set against you. Do you think if there were a new administration after Joe Biden that you would be able to reestablish communication with the US government? Or does it not matter who the president is?
Сейчас скажу, но чтобы закончить предыдущий вопрос.
I will tell you, but let me finish the previous thought. We, together with my colleague and friend, President Xi Jinping, set a goal to reach $200 billion of mutual trade with China this year. We have exceeded this level. According to our figures, our bilateral trade with China totals already $230 billion, and the Chinese statistics says it is $240 billion. One more important thing, our trade is well balanced, mutually complementary in high-tech, energy, scientific research and development. It is very balanced. As for BRICS, where Russia took over the presidency this year, the BRICS countries are, by and large, developing very rapidly. Look, if memory serves me right, back in 1992, the share of the G7 countries in the world economy amounted to 47%, whereas in 2022, it was down to, I think, a little over 30%. The BRICS countries accounted for only 16% in 1992, but now their share is greater than that of the G7. It has nothing to do with the events in Ukraine. This is due to the trends of global development and world economy, as I mentioned just now. And this is inevitable. This will keep happening. It is like the rise of the sun. You cannot prevent the sun from rising. You have to adapt to it. How do the United States adapt? With the help of force, sanctions, pressure, bombings, and use of armed forces. This is about self-conceit. Your political establishment does not understand that the world is changing under objective circumstances. And in order to preserve your level, even if someone aspires, pardon me, to the level of dominance, you have to make the right decisions in a competent and timely manner. Such brutal actions, including with regard to Russia and, say, other countries, are counterproductive. This is an obvious fact. It has already become evident. You just asked me if another leader comes and changes something. It is not about the leader. It is not about the personality of a particular person. I had a very good relationship with, say, Bush. I know that in the United States, he was portrayed as some kind of a country boy who does not understand much. I assure you that this is not the case. I think he made a lot of mistakes with regard to Russia, too. I told you about 2008 and the decision in Bucharest to open the NATO's doors for Ukraine and so on. That happened during his presidency. He actually exercised pressure on the Europeans. But in general, on a personal human level, I had a very good relationship with him. He was no worse than any other American or Russian or European politician. I assure you, he understood what he was doing as well as others. I had such personal relationship with Trump as well. It is not about the personality of the leader. It is about the elite's mindset. If the idea of domination at any cost, based also on forceful actions, dominates the American society, nothing will change. It will only get worse. But if in the
I'll tell
end,
you, what
comes
he's saying
to
is, it's falling right into this idea of this national security state and big finance trying to push a certain agenda that will backfire and hurt the American public in terms of tax-paying dollars, in terms of indebtedness, in terms of military prowess. We are an empire. The United States is an empire, right? But it's declining. It's a declining empire. We are increasing the probability of losing our hegemonic power in the world because of failed policies. This idea that we'll do whatever we want, and not looking at this more harmoniously with the partners of the world. Right? Now that may sound kind of utopic to try to reach that goal, but I think there are some very nefarious things that the United States has been doing. And you get to the root cause. It's about the money with the military industrial complex and this overreach by the national security state. And that's why I keep on saying, go to the root cause and fix it. Because if you don't fix the root cause, it will still flare up.
Is that the world has been changing due to the objective circumstances, and that one should be able to adapt to them in time, using the advantages that the US still has today, then perhaps something may change. Look, China's economy has become the first economy in the world in purchasing power parity. In terms of volume, it overtook the US a long time ago. The USA comes second, India, 1.5 billion people, and then Japan, with Russia in the 5th place. Russia was the first economy in Europe last year, despite all the sanctions and restrictions. Is it normal from your point of view? Sanctions, restrictions, impossibility of payments in dollars, being cut off from SWIFT services, sanctions against our ships carrying oil, sanctions against airplanes, sanctions in everything, everywhere. The largest number of sanctions in the world which are applied against Russia. And we have become Europe's first economy during this time. The tools that US uses don't work. Well, one has to think about what to do. If this realization comes to the ruling elites, then yes, then the first person of the state will act in anticipation of what the voters and the people who make decisions at various levels expect from this person. Then maybe something will change.
But you're describing two different systems. You say that the leader acts in the interest of the voters, but you also say these decisions are not made by the leader, they're made by the ruling classes. You've run this country for so long known all these American presidents. What are those power centers in the United States, do you think? But who actually makes the decisions?
Америка сложная страна, такая очень, с одной стороны, консервативная.
I don't know. America is a complex country, conservative on one hand, rapidly changing on the other. It's not easy for us to sort it all out. Who makes decisions in the elections? Is it possible to understand this when each state has its own legislation? Each state regulates itself. Someone can be excluded from elections at the state level. It is a two-stage electoral system. It is very difficult for us to understand it. Secondly, there are two parties that are dominant, the Republicans and the Democrats. And within this party system, the centers that make decisions, that prepare decisions. Then, look, why, in my opinion, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, such an erroneous, crude, completely unjustified policy of pressure was pursued against Russia? After all, this is a policy of pressure. NATO expansion, support for the separatists in Caucasus, creation of a missile defense system. These are all elements of pressure. Pressure, pressure, pressure. Then dragging Ukraine into NATO is all about pressure, pressure, pressure. Why? I think, among other things, because excessive production capacities were created. During the confrontation with the Soviet Union, there were many centers created and specialists on the Soviet Union who could not do anything else. They convinced the political leadership that it is necessary to continue chiseling Russia, to try to break it up, to create on this territory several quasi-state entities.
Now, this is now at this moment in time, take your piece of paper and write this down. 1 hour, 32 minutes, and 35 seconds in, Tucker has that constipation look, with his eyes, right? The deer in the headlight. It's a signal, all right? And here, he's talking about how during the Cold War era, you had this military-industrial complex being built up, all right? And then all of a sudden, the fall of the USSR, and this now new emerging Russia in this post-Berlin Wall fall, right? And what do? You got to find a new enemy, right? Or you have to continue demonizing your old enemy. And you see that with the CFR and the Trilateral Commission and these think tanks. I think it's CSIS, and others, right? And, there are like guest speakers that, that I listen to, through these lectures, either at the club or through the Harvard alumni. And, sometimes they're dealing with international affairs and, they have a certain perspective. Some people are, more focused on the Middle East or Asia, but there are several that are focused on, Russia and, European international affairs. I'll tell you, most of them are very negative on Putin and on Russia. And they have this kind of Cold War mentality. So there's an infrastructure that's built up because of the Cold War. And we still have this kind of like Cold War mentality. And we're funding it. We still have to fund that military industrial complex, right? And the reason why is because people that are in power can make a lot of money doing this. But I mean people in power, I mean the puppet masters. And these think tank groups, it's like a lecture circuit kind of thing. They all kind of like move around like in like a herd, right? And they go from one conference to another, and then some of these people, they go to Bilderberg, some of them go to Davos, some of them go, some other place, whatever. They're just constantly rotating. And it's like an industry, right? So you come out of government and you go to a think tank, and you get somehow your money that way. And maybe there's some sort of under the table stuff going on? I don't know, but there is an industry that's being supported in the post-Cold War era, like we're in now, that still has a Cold War mentality. That's a problem. And Putin's stating this to Tucker. And I'll tell you, right at 1 hour and 32 minutes and 35 seconds, he has this signaling look on his face. And I think that's an important feature to write down.
In a divided form to use their combined potential for the future struggle with China. This is a mistake, including the excessive potential of those who worked for the confrontation with the Soviet Union. It is necessary to get rid of this. There should be new, fresh forces, people who look into the future and understand what is happening in the world. Look at how Indonesia is developing. 600 million people. Where can we get away from that? Nowhere. We just have to assume that Indonesia will enter. It is already in the club of the world's leading economies, no matter who likes it or dislikes it. Yes, we understand and are aware that in the United States, despite all the economic problems, the situation is still normal, with the economy growing decently. The GDP is growing by 2.5%, if I'm not mistaken. But if we want to ensure the future, then we need to change our approach to what is changing. As I already said, the world would nevertheless change, regardless of how the developments in Ukraine end. The world is changing. In the United States themselves, experts are writing that the United States are nonetheless gradually changing their position in the world. It is your experts who write that. I just read them. The only question is how this would happen, painfully and quickly, or gently and gradually. And this is written by people who are not anti-American. They simply follow global development trends. That's it. And in order to assess them and change policies, we need people who think, look forward, can analyze and recommend certain decisions at the level of political leaders.
I just have to ask you, you've said clearly that NATO expansion eastward is a violation of the promise you all made in 1990. It's a threat to your country. Right before you sent troops into Ukraine, the Vice President of the United States went to the Munich Security Conference and encouraged the President of Ukraine to join NATO. Do you think that was an effort to provoke you into military action?
Я еще раз повторяю, мы многократно предлагали.
I repeat once again, we have repeatedly proposed to seek a solution to the problems that arose in Ukraine after 2014 coup d'etat through peaceful means. But no one listened to us. And moreover, the Ukrainian leaders who were under the complete US control suddenly declared that they would not comply with the Minsk agreements. They disliked everything there and continued military activity in that territory.
Шло освоение этой территории натовскими военными структурами. Под видом различных центров.
And in parallel, that territory was being exploited by NATO military structures under the guise of various personnel training and retraining centers. They essentially began to create bases there. That's all. Ukraine announced that the Russians were a non-titular nationality, while passing the laws that limit the rights of non-titular nationalities in Ukraine. Ukraine, having received all these southeastern territories as a gift from the Russian people, suddenly announced that the Russians were a non-titular nationality in that territory. Is that normal? All this put together led to the decision to end the war that neo-Nazis started in Ukraine in 2014.
Do you think Zelensky has the freedom to negotiate a settlement to this conflict?
I don't know the details. Of course, it's difficult for me to judge. But I believe he has, in any case, he used to have. His father fought against the fascists, Nazis, during World War II. I once talked to him about this. I said, Volodya, what are you doing? Why are you supporting neo-Nazis in Ukraine today, while your father fought against fascism? He was a frontline soldier. I will not tell you what he answered. This is a separate topic, and I think it's incorrect for me to do so. But as to the freedom of choice, why not? He came to power on the expectations of Ukrainian people that he would lead Ukraine to peace. He talked about this. It was thanks to this that he won the elections overwhelmingly. But then, when he came to power, in my opinion, he realized two things. Firstly, it is better not to clash with neo-Nazis and nationalists because they are aggressive and very active. You can expect anything from them. And secondly, the US-led West supports them and will always support those who antagonize with Russia. It is beneficial and safe. So he took the relevant position despite promising his people to end the war in Ukraine. He deceived his voters.
But do you think at this point, as of February 2024, he has the latitude, the freedom to speak with you or your government directly about putting an end to this, which clearly isn't helping his country or the world? Can he do that, do you think?
Ну, а почему нет? Он же
Why
считается
not?
главой государства.
He considers himself head of state. He won the elections. Although we believe in Russia that the coup d'etat is the primary source of power for everything that happened after 2014. And in this sense, even today, government is flawed. But he considers himself the president, and he is recognized by the United States, all of Europe, and practically the rest of the world in such a capacity. Why not?
Договорились,
Can.
она же знала бы. Более того,
We negotiated with Ukraine in Istanbul. We agreed. He was aware of this.
до сих пор
Moreover, the negotiation group leader, Mr. Arkamia is his last name, I believe still has the faction of the ruling party, the party of the president in the Rada.
президент врать.
He still has the presidential faction in the Rada, the country's parliament. He still sits there. He even put his preliminary signature on the document I am telling you about. But then he publicly stated to the whole world, we were ready to sign this document, but Mr. Johnson, then the Prime Minister of Great Britain, came and dissuaded us from doing this, saying it was better to fight Russia. They would give everything needed for us to return what was lost during the clashes with Russia, and we agreed with this proposal. Look, his statement has been published. He said it publicly. Can they return to this or not? The question is, do they want it or not?
Еще господин президент
Further on, President of Ukraine issued a decree prohibiting negotiations with us.
ну пусть он отменит.
Let him cancel that
Мы же не
decree,
отказываемся.
and that's it.
Вот нам
We have never refused negotiations, indeed.
Мы не отказываемся.
We hear all the time, is Russia ready?
Лично отказать.
Yes, we have not refused. It was them who publicly refused. Well, let him cancel his decree and enter into negotiations. We have never refused. And the fact that they obeyed the demand or persuasion of Mr. Johnson, the former Prime Minister of Great Britain, seems ridiculous and very sad to me. Because, as Mr. Arakamiya put it, we could have stopped those hostilities with war a year and a half ago already.
Понимает этого.
But the British persuaded us and we refused this. Where is Mr. Johnson now? And the war continues.
That's a good question. Where do you think he is, and why did he do that?
Да хрен его знает. Ты сам не понимаешь. Общую
Hell knows.
Почему да?
I don't understand it myself.
Что Россию можно победить на поле.
There was a general starting point. For some reason, everyone had the illusion that Russia could be defeated on the battlefield.
От чистого сердца, но
Because of arrogance, because of a pure heart, but not because of a great mind.
You've described the connection between Russia and Ukraine. You've described Russia itself a couple of times as orthodox. That's central to your understanding of Russia. You said you're orthodox. What does that mean for you? You're a Christian leader by your own description. So what effect does that have on you?
You know, As I already mentioned, in 988, Prince Vladimir himself was baptized following the example of his grandmother, Princess Olga. And then he baptized his squad. And then gradually, over the course of several years, he baptized all the Rus. It was a lengthy process, from pagans to Christians. It took many years. But in the end, this orthodoxy, Eastern Christianity, deeply rooted itself in the consciousness of the Russian people. When Russia expanded and absorbed other nations who profess Islam, Buddhism, and Judaism, Russia has always been very loyal to those people who profess other religions. This is her strength. This is absolutely clear. And the fact is that the main postulates, main values are very similar, not to say the same, in all world religions I just mentioned, and which are the traditional religions of the Russian Federation, Russia. By the way, Russian authorities were always very careful about the culture and religion of those people who came into the Russian Empire. This, in my opinion, forms the basis of both security and stability of the Russian statehood. All the peoples inhabiting Russia basically consider it their motherhood. They say people move over to you or to Europe from Latin America. An even clearer and more understandable example, people come, but yet they have come to you or to European countries from their historical homeland. And people who profess different religions in Russia consider Russia their motherland. They have no other motherland. We are together. This is one big family, and our traditional values are very similar. I've just mentioned one big family, but everyone has her own family. And this is the basis of our society. And if we say that the motherland and the family are specifically connected with each other, it is indeed the case, since it is impossible to ensure a normal future for our children and our families unless we ensure a normal, sustainable future for the entire country, for the motherland. That is why patriotic sentiment is so strong in Russia.
Can I say that the one way in which the religions are different is that Christianity is specifically a non-violent religion. Jesus says, turn the other cheek, don't kill. How can a leader who has to kill of any country, how can a leader be a Christian? How do you reconcile
That's such
that
a dumb question,
yourself?
Tucker. What about the cruise? What about the explorers? And as they were colonizing the Americas under Christianity, all right, there was war and destruction that took place. And come on, there's war and destruction that took place during the Crusades. I mean, it's just all religions have some sort of level of violence.
It is very easy when it comes to protecting oneself and one's family, one's homeland. We won't attack anyone. When did the developments in Ukraine start? Since the coup d'etat and the hostilities in Donbass began, that's when they started. And we're protecting our people, ourselves, our homeland, and our future. As for religion in general, you know, it's not about external manifestations. It's not about going to church every day or banging your head on the floor. It is in the heart. And our culture is so human-oriented. Dostoevsky, who was very well known in the West and the genius of Russian culture, Russian literature, spoke a lot about this, about the Russian soul. After all, Western society is more pragmatic. Russian people think more about the eternal, about moral values. I don't know, maybe you won't agree with me, but Western culture is more pragmatic after all.
Возможность вот сегодняшнему золотому миллиарду.
I'm not saying this is bad. It makes it possible for today's golden billion to achieve good success in production, even in science and so on.
Мы вроде как выглядим одинаково, но
There's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying that we kind of look the same.
So do you see the supernatural at work as you look out across what's happening in the world now? Do you see God at work? Do you ever think to yourself, these are forces that are not human?
Да нет, я, честно говоря, так не думаю. Я думаю о том, что
No, to be honest, I don't think so.
развивается свои группы.
My opinion is that the development of the world community is in accordance with the inherent laws, and those laws are what they are.
Было всегда в истории человечества.
It's always been this way in the history of mankind. Some nations and countries rose, became stronger and more numerous, and then left the international stage, losing the status they had accustomed to. There's probably no need for me to give examples, but we could start with the Genghis Khan and horde conquerors, the Golden Horde, and then
Let me just interject. Now, just imagine going for 2 hours with an intellectual conversation. If you agree or disagree with him, it doesn't matter. But obviously, he has mental acuity and he has a strong sense of history and he has a logical formation of the argument. All right. Just imagine having this sort of setup with Biden and what a fiasco that would be. So we have, the president of the United States that literally doesn't have a brain, metaphorically and literally, compared to someone that maybe is ailing. We don't know. Putin may be ailing. We just don't know. Most likely he is. But the mental acuity there is amazing. All right. And he has a very strong sense of purpose and of history and of current affairs. And that's what we're dealing with here. We are run by a bunch of idiots in America. Please go to my store. I'm going to do a commercial here. Please go to my store and get the multivitamin that I offer. This has the cofactors to help with having the right conformation for the enzymes. So minerals and vitamins are cofactors, act as cofactors for proper metabolism. So please go to my store. I have an easy to digest multivitamin. Take that every day as part of your anti-aging protocol. I have partnered up with Rainbow Herbals and we have created these very high quality deodorant bars. You can either get it in citrus or in peppermint, tea tree, lavender. These deodorant bars are made from essential oils from the Himalayas, very, very high quality natural ingredients. You use this bar every day. It's for males and females, but it will also help to detoxify your body. It doesn't have any aluminum in it. So use this every day for males and females. Get a couple bars of this from my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. I also have structural nano silver soaps. I have it in a few varieties. I have it in lavender, charcoal tea tree, oatmeal spice, and peppermint. So please go to the store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the structural nano silver soaps that I offer. Very high quality soaps, and you will be impressed. So please go to the store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. And lastly, please go to the store and get the structural nano silver liquid. Take a teaspoon of this a day just to maintain your health. Swish it in your mouth, gargle, swallow. I take a teaspoon of this every day. So either get the Health Max 14, Health Max 35, or the silver solution. The Health Max 14 has 14 parts per million for structural nano silver. The Max 35 has 35 parts per million, and the Silver solution has 30 parts per million. So depending on the amount of ppms you want or your price point, please go to the store, take a teaspoon of it a day. If you're not feeling well, take a tablespoon or 2 a day.
And with the Roman Empire, it seems that there has never been anything like the Roman Empire in the history of mankind. Nevertheless, the potential of the barbarians gradually grew, as did their population. In general, the barbarians were getting stronger and began to develop economically, as we would say today. This eventually led to the collapse of the Roman Empire and the regime imposed by the Romans. However, it took 5 centuries for the Roman Empire to fall apart. The difference with what is happening now is that all the processes of change are happening at a much faster pace than in Roman times.
So when does the AI empire start, do you think?
Hopefully now.
You're asking increasingly more complicated questions. To answer them, you need to be an expert in big numbers, big data, and AI. Mankind is currently facing many threats. Due to the genetic researches, it is now possible to create a superhuman, a specialized human being, a genetically engineered athlete, scientist, military man. There are reports that Elon Musk had already had a chip implanted in the human brain in the USA.
What do you think of that?
Well, I think there's no stopping Elon Musk. He will do as he sees fit. Nevertheless, you need to find some common ground with him, search for ways to persuade him. I think he's a smart person. I truly believe he is. So you need to reach an agreement with him because this process needs to be formalized and subjected to certain rules.
Что будет происходить с ним в связи с развитием вот этих новейших исследований и технологий?
Humanity has to consider what is going to happen due to the newest development in genetics or in AI. One can make an approximate prediction of what will happen.
К своему существованию. От ядерного оружия все начали обладать ядерным.
Once mankind felt an existential threat coming from nuclear weapons, all nuclear nations began to come to terms with one another since they realized the negligent use of nuclear weaponry could drive humanity to extinction.
Генетики или еще каких-то современных направлений, остановить которые невозможно.
It is impossible to stop research in genetics or AI today, just as it was impossible to stop the use of gunpowder back in the day.
Эти исследования все равно будут. Но когда человечество почувствует угрозу для себя.
But as soon as we realize that the threat comes from unbridled and uncontrolled development of AI or genetics or any other field, the time will come to reach an international agreement on how to regulate these things.
I appreciate all the time you've given us. I was going to ask you one last question, and that's about someone who's very famous in the United States, probably not here, Evan Gershkovich, who's the Wall Street Journal reporter. He's 32, and he's been in prison for almost a year. This is a huge story in the United States, and I just want to ask you directly, without getting into details of it or your version of what happened, if as a sign of your decency, you would be willing to release him to us and we'll bring him back to the United States.
Мы столько сделали жестов доброй воли, что, мне кажется, мы исчерпали все.
We have done so many gestures of goodwill out of decency that I think we have run out of them.
Но
we have never seen anyone reciprocate to us in a similar manner. However, in theory, we can say that we do not rule out that we can do that. If our partners take reciprocal steps. When I talk about the partners, I first of all refer to special services. Special services are in contact with one another. They are talking about the matter in question.
на то, чтобы не решить это.
There is no taboo to settle this issue. We're willing to solve it.
Условия, которые
But there are certain terms being discussed via special services channels.
партнерским каналом между спецслужбами.
I believe an agreement can be reached.
So typically, I mean, this stuff has happened for obviously centuries. One country catches another spy within its borders, it trades it for one of its own intel guys in another country. I think what makes it, and it's not my business, but what makes this different is the guy's obviously not a spy, he's a kid. And maybe he was breaking your law in some way, but he's not a super spy, and everybody knows that. And he's being held hostage in exchange, which is true. With respect, it's true, and everyone knows it's true. So maybe he's in a different category. Maybe it's not fair to ask for, you know, somebody else in exchange for letting him out. Maybe it degrades Russia to do that.
Вы знаете, можно как угодно говорить, что такое шпион, что
You know, you can
Talker, you don't understand the Russians. You take one of our guys, we take one of your guys. We exchange and drink some vodka together. Don't you understand?
the interpretations to what constitutes a spy. But there are certain things provided by law. If a person gets secret information and does that in a conspiratorial manner, then this is qualified as espionage. And that is exactly what he was doing. He was receiving classified, confidential information, and he did it covertly. Maybe he did that out of carelessness or his own initiative. Considering the sheer fact that this is qualified as espionage, the fact has been proven as he was caught red-handed when he was receiving this information. If it had been some far-fetched excuse, some fabrication, something not proven, it would have been a different story then. But he was caught red-handed when he was secretly getting confidential information. What is it then?
But are you suggesting that he was working for the US government or NATO, or he was just a reporter who was given material he wasn't supposed to have? Those seem like very different things.
Я не знаю, на кого он работал. Но повторяю еще раз.
I don't know who he was working for, but I would like to reiterate that getting classified information in secret is called espionage, and he was working for the US Special Services, some other agencies. I don't think he was working for Monaco, as Monaco is hardly interested in getting that information. It is up to special services to come to an agreement. Some groundwork has been laid. There are people who, in our view, are not connected with special services. Let me tell you a story about a person serving a sentence in an allied country of the US. The person, due to patriotic sentiments, eliminated a bandit in one of the European capitals. During the events in the Caucasus, do you know what he was doing? I don't want to say that, but I will do it anyway. He was laying our soldiers, taken prisoner, on the road and then drove his car over their heads. What kind of person is that? Can he even be called human? But there was a patriot who eliminated him in one of the European capitals. Whether he did it of his own volition or not, that is a different question.
Yeah, but Evan, where's that? I mean, that's a completely different. I mean, this is a 32-year-old. Like most people,
He committed something different. He's not just a journalist. I reiterate, he's a journalist who was secretly getting confidential information. Yes, it is different, but still, I'm talking about other people who are essentially controlled by the US authorities, wherever they're serving a sentence. There's an ongoing dialogue between the special services. This has to be resolved in a calm,
There's a deeper
responsible
thing going on here. Think about what's going on with Snowden and Julian Assange, especially Julian Assange. All right, he's in captivity. all right, he gets information that was provided to him by individuals within government showing the nefarious things that were going on, especially during our excursions in the Middle East, all right, through WikiLeaks and all this stuff, right? And showing to the world the Five Eyes and all the nefarious things that they were doing, all right? But yet our government is saying, you know what, this journalist in Russia needs to be let go, you know, our government's saying this, needs to be let go because, you know, he's just an innocent bystander or an innocent journalist and he, you know, didn't know what he was doing or whatever. But won't let Julian Assange free. See, the problem with the United States is that they play both sides of the fence. They don't play based on morality. Either it's okay to have Julian Assange in jail, and therefore this individual that's in Russia in jail, or both of them should be freed. Which one is it, United States?
Professional manner. They're keeping in touch, so let them do their work. I do not rule out that the person you refer to, Mr. Dershkovitz, may return to his motherland. By the end of the day, it does not make any sense to keep him in prison in Russia. We want the U.S. Special Services to think about how they can contribute to achieving the goals our special services are pursuing. We are ready to talk. Moreover, the talks are on their way. And there have been many successful examples of these talks crowned with success. Probably this is going to be crowned with success as well. But we have to come to an agreement.
I hope you let him out. Mr. President, thank you.
I also want him to return to it.
There's a little bit more to the interview. Just let me do a commercial here. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the resveratrol. This helps to get rid of senescent cells, and it is a strong antioxidant. I also sell C60 in avocado and coconut in 2-ounce, 4-ounce, and an 8-ounce configuration. This is a very strong antioxidant, brings down that free radical, and helps with boosting up your mitochondrial health. It's a major part of my anti-aging protocol. Another part of my anti-aging protocol is bringing down inflammation. You do that by taking turmeric. Turmeric also is an antioxidant. Take the turmeric with ashwagandha to control your blood glucose levels. That will bring down that inflammatory response on your cardiovascular system. Vitamin C is really important to boost up your immune system. It's also an antioxidant, but it's not as strong as C60. C60 is an extremely strong antioxidant that you need to take every day. With C60, you take a teaspoon of this. Your daily dose of vitamin C will help with your dermal layer for your skin, but also help to boost up your immune system. Take a double dose if you're sick. Clarity factor helps to have better acuity, your mental acuity. It'll get rid of brain fog. Take this every day to improve your memory and your focus. Probiotic. I have it in a powder form and a capsule form. This will help get that proper gut biome for proper health. So please get either the powder form or the capsule form from my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. And lastly, take vitamin D3. It is a gene expression cofactor. If you have low vitamin D3, you're not going to have as robust gene expression, and therefore your cellular processes are going to be subpar. In addition, you need vitamin D3 to help with calcium absorption and just proper good health. So go to my store and get the vitamin D3. I take 10,000 units of this. I take 5,000, which is just one soft gel in the morning and another one at night. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the vitamin D and all the supplements from my store. I also have been populating the pulmonary module so people can learn about pulmonology and how the lung works. Every day I'm publishing a new lecture for $50 if you purchase the module on my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, under classes, you'll get 22 PDFs of pulmonology and a lecture that's associated with the PDF. And I release a new lecture a day every business day. Okay? There's going to be 22 lectures, and then after that, I'm going to start releasing an additional module. The next module most likely will be infectious diseases. So please go to my store, get the supplements, get the books, and sign up for the classes. It's only $50, and it's a great value. You learn a lot about medicine in terms of the pulmonary system. So let's finish up with Tucker Carlson and Putin.
Well, at last, I'm absolutely sincere. But let me say once again, the dialogue continues. The more public we render things of this nature, the more difficult it becomes to resolve them. Everything has to be done in calm manner.
I wonder if that's true with the war, though. Also, I mean, I guess I want to ask one more question, which is, and maybe you don't want to say so for strategic reasons, but are you worried that what's happening in Ukraine could lead to something much larger and much more horrible? How motivated are you just to call the US government and say, let's come to terms?
Послушайте, я же сказал.
I already said that we did not refuse to talk. We're willing to negotiate. It is the Western side, and Ukraine is obviously a satellite state of the US. It is evident. I do not want you to take it as if I'm looking for a strong word or an insult, but we both understand what is happening. The financial support, $72 billion was provided. Germany ranks second, then other European countries come. Dozens of billions of US dollars are going to Ukraine. There's a huge influx of weapons. In this case, you should tell the current Ukrainian leadership to stop and come to negotiating table, rescind this absurd decree. We did not refuse.
Sure, but you already said it. I didn't think you meant it as an insult, because you already said correctly, it's been reported that Ukraine was prevented from negotiating a peace settlement by the former British Prime Minister, acting on behalf of the Biden administration. So of course, they're a satellite. Big countries control small countries. That's not new. And that's why I asked about dealing directly with the Biden administration, which is making these decisions, not President Zelensky of Ukraine.
Но если администрация Зеленского на Украине отказалась от переговоров,
Well, if the Zelensky administration in Ukraine refused to negotiate, I assume they did it under the instruction from Washington. If Washington believes it to be the wrong decision, let it abandon it. Let it find a delicate excuse so that no one is insulted. Let it come up with a way out. It was not us who made this decision, it was them. So let them go back on it. That is it. However, they made the wrong decision, and now we have to look for a way out of this situation to correct their mistakes. They did it, so let them correct it themselves. We support this.
So I just want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding what you're saying. I don't think I am. I think you're saying you want a negotiated settlement to what's happening in Ukraine.
Right. And we made it. We prepared a huge document in Istanbul that was initialed by the head of the Ukrainian delegation. He affixed his signature to some of the provisions, not to all of it. He put his signature, and then he himself said, we were ready to sign it, and the war would have been over long ago, 18 months ago. However, Prime Minister Johnson came, talked us out of it, and we missed that chance. Well, you missed it, you made a mistake, let them get back to that, that is all. Why do we have to bother ourselves and correct somebody else's mistakes? I know one can say it is our mistake. It was us who intensified the situation and decided to put an end to the war that started in 2014 in Donbass, as I have already said, by means of weapons. Let me get back to further in history. I already told you this. We were just discussing it. Let us go back to 1991, when we were promised that NATO would not expand, to 2008, when the doors to NATO opened to the declaration of state sovereignty of Ukraine, declaring Ukraine a neutral state. Let us go back to the fact that NATO and US military bases started to appear on the territory of Ukraine, creating threats to us. Let us go back to coup d'etat in Ukraine in 2014. It is pointless though, isn't it? When they go back and forth endlessly, but they stop negotiations. Is it a mistake? Yes. Correct it. We are ready. What else is needed?
Do you think it's too humiliating at this point for NATO to accept Russian control of what was 2 years ago Ukrainian territory?
The bottom line is that for this to reach some sort of peaceful conclusion without unconventional warfare, the NATO forces is going to have to admit and accept the fact that it was NATO's posturing going all the way back to 1991 that led to this crisis, and that further things were starting to evolve, and that, you know what, the American public, the policy wonks, the puppet masters are going to have to admit that they had a failed policy, and that it just suck it up, eat some crow, and we'll have some peace in Europe. Unfortunately, they're not going to do that, and this may escalate.
I said, let them think how to do it with dignity. There are options if there is a will. Up until now, there has been the uproar and screaming about inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia on the battlefield. Now they are apparently coming to realize that it is difficult to achieve, if possible at all. In my opinion, it is impossible by definition. It is never going to happen. It seems to me that now those who are in power in the West have come to realize this as well.
I mean, think about it.
So,
think about it. You've had Hitler that tried this, didn't work out. You had Napoleon that tried this, didn't work out. You have the NATO alliance trying this through a proxy war with Ukraine, didn't work out. You know what? Just let it be and start integrating peacefully, economically, Russia into the sphere of, of peaceful nations. This, I'll tell you, we as a people need to stop this military industrial complex and this national security state. It's causing so much death, destruction, and instability economically. It's sad. It's sad, but we let it happen. We let it happen. As a people, we let it happen.
And has set in, they have to think what to do next. We're ready for this dialogue.
Would you be willing to say, congratulations, NATO, you won, and just keep the situation where it is now?
You know, it is a subject matter for the negotiations. No one is willing to conduct, or to put it more accurately, they're willing, but do not know how to do it. I know they want it. It is not just I see it, but I know they do want it. But they're struggling to understand how to do it. They have driven the situation to the point where we are at. It is not us who have done that. It is our partners, opponents who have done that. Well, now let them think how to reverse the situation. We're not against it. It would be funny if it were not so sad. This endless mobilization in Ukraine, the hysteria, the domestic problems, Sooner or later, it will result in agreement.
Истерика там, внутренней правды.
You know, this probably sounds strange given the current situation,
Все равно договоримся. И
but the relations between the two peoples will be rebuilt anyway.
ситуация прозвучит.
It will take a lot of time, but they will heal.
Между народами останется. Потребуется много времени.
I'll give you very unusual examples.
Совсем необычные времена.
There's a combat encounter on the battlefield. Here's a specific example. Ukrainian soldiers get encircled. This is an example from real life. Our soldiers were shouting to them, "There is no chance. Surrender yourselves. Come out and you will be alive."
Наши солдаты им кричат.
Suddenly, the Ukrainian soldiers were screaming from there in Russian, perfect Russian, saying, "Russians, do not surrender." And all of them perished.
Не сдаются.
They still identify themselves as Russian.
А теперь по-русски нельзя ощущать. В этом смысле то, что...
What is happening is, to a certain extent, an element of a civil war. Everyone in the West thinks that the Russian people have been split by hostilities forever.
Растащили.
No, they will be reunited.
Yeah.
The unity is still there.
Воссоединение произойдет. Оно никуда не идет.
Why are the Ukrainian authorities dismantling the Ukrainian Orthodox Church?
Русскую православную церковь.
Because it brings together not only the territory, it brings together our souls. No one will be able to separate the soul. Shall we end here, or is there anything else?
No, I think that's great. Спасибо. Thank you, Mr. President.
So that's my coverage of the interview from Tucker with Putin. I think it was extremely well done. I think there's some signals that are going on with Tucker. I question about, is he a white hat or not, within the CIA. I have a feeling that he is. But I can't prove it. All right. But what's more important is that you had a journalist that allowed the guest to speak. And that guest was intelligent and had a very strong historical context. And that was very subtly, because he could have been more belligerent, but very subtly showing to Tucker's audience, and a big part of that is the United States, but also to the world at large, the nefarious activities by the national security state. And that we as a people within the United States needs to hold the CIA and the puppet masters accountable. But we won't. And that's the problem. Because we didn't shut down GOF, because we don't hold the people accountable that funded GOF, because we don't hold the people accountable for coups that lead to major wars, we have problems. And the United States is fracturing. It's cracking. Economically, politically, even socially, because of the erosion of the family and the erosion of God and country. We can't afford the national security state anymore, literally and spiritually. Now, that's my take on it. I'm sure others have a different take. Maybe they're more positive about Tucker. Maybe they're more negative on Tucker. Maybe they're more positive on Putin. Maybe they're more negative on Putin. I don't know. I will do another show about that, on how other people have been covering it. But that's my take, and I think I've provided some unique perspectives. All right. Thank you for listening. Thank you for the ones that are on X, especially the ones that are regulars that listen during the live broadcast. I appreciate it. You know, we all need to come together, because if we don't, we're going to see World War III in our lifetime. Thank you for watching, and have a nice day.